Listener warning. In this episode, we talk about child abuse and the effects of child abuse. If you are triggered, please skip this episode and we'll see you on the next one.
Welcome back to Season 5 of the True Blue Conversations podcast with your host, Adam Bloom. G'day, podcasters. Before we get underway with True Blue Conversations, just wanted to give a huge shout out to our friend and sponsor, the Warrior U podcast, hosted by Bram Connolly. Bram is a former Special Forces commander, best-selling author, popular podcast host, and human optimization pioneer. He has an authentic style and the unique ability to not only motivate, but also take people on a journey of self-discovery. Through the Warrior U podcast, Bram interviews guests in a bid to explore all things human optimization, resilience, leadership, and coffee. His book, The Commando Way, a Special Forces Commander's Lessons for Life, Leadership and Success, is available now on amazon.com.au. So from Adam Bloom and all of us here at True Blue Conversations, a big shout out to the Warrior U podcast, Bram Connolly, and his new book, The Commando Way, out now.
G'day, welcome back to True Blue Conversations. I'm Adam Bloom. Today, I'm joined by Western Australian police veteran Kristi McVee. I love that name. And she's joined us today to talk about her career in the West Australian Police Force and what she does now. And she's got an amazing story. She's an author, she's a podcast host, and her story is just one of true inspiration, and she just really cares about child safety. And yeah, I've got her on today to talk about her career. So Kristi McVee, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you, mate. Thank you very much. I'm so glad I'm finally here because we've been talking for a little while, and yeah, it's always good to chat.
No, it's an absolute honor and a privilege to have you on. And as I mentioned, so you're a police veteran, and but before we get into that, let's go back and let's talk about Kristi as growing up when you were younger, and what was life like? What were you like at school? And did you always know that you wanted to be a police officer?
Ooh, interesting questions. I've never been asked these in a podcast before, so that's cool. So little Kristi, she was born in 1981, so I'm 42 this year. I mean, it doesn't feel old. 80s doesn't feel old, but if you ask someone born over 2000 mark, it's old.
Don't worry, I cop it too. So, and I was born in the 90s.
I know. Wow, you. So life in the 80s was pretty hard, right? So you might have copped it. Your parents might have copped it in the end of the recession and stuff like that. But my parents were very transient. So I grew up like traveling town to town following work. My dad was a truck driver. My mom was a truck driver because she followed my dad into the industry, worked in mining towns, didn't have a lot of money, lived in a caravan, not always lived in housing, so it's interesting because right now we're going through sort of a similar crisis of not having people not having enough money to pay rent. And I'm like, yeah, I'd happily live in a caravan. I did it for most of my childhood. But I just think, with my childhood, it wasn't always good. I have written in my book, like you mentioned, I have written a book. I have told a bit of my story. Both my parents were afflicted with alcohol addiction. There was some drug use. There was some, luckily, no domestic violence in my family. My dad was such a soft soul, but he was just a really tortured soul. So he drank a lot, and he was a functioning alcoholic. My mum was an alcoholic as well, but not so functioning. And I actually ended up living with my dad from age 7 onwards. Because he was the much more stable parent, and in somewhere in there, obviously I was only little, but I didn't actually have a say in where I went. But somewhere in there, it was decided we would go with my dad, who, again, like I said, was very transient. I moved around a lot every 6 months as my dad was trying to find stable work. And so I ended up in Port Hedland. Now, I know you're from New South Wales, but Port Hedland is sort of in line with Mackay in Queensland. Much more dry, less rainforesty. But yeah, I ended up in Port Hedland. That's where finally we settled when I was about 9 years old. And I grew up there, which is a very small town, very, very close-knit community, mining town again. And but from there, my childhood was pretty much more stable, and I have still got lots of friends from that time, and many good memories.
So what were you like at school? Were you pretty gifted and academic, or did you have to work hard for your grades?
I was a hardworking student. I was petrified of being in trouble. So as a child, because of like when you look back and you're old enough to look back at this stuff, you realize that it's got a lot to do with, what you got in trouble for as a kid. If you were in trouble for, and I was very much more a parent to my dad, and I had a stepmom and stuff, but I became a very mature young head on young shoulders kind of thing. And but I was petrified to get anything below like top marks. So I worked really hard. I was not a naturally gifted student. Even now I have to work hard to retain knowledge. And so I worked really hard because I was scared to not do good. I have a younger brother as well, and he's 2 years younger, and he was the larrikin and the joker, and he was always in trouble and doing stupid shit. So I was in charge of looking after him as well. So I was constantly trailing behind him, trying to make sure he didn't like kill himself or do any permanent damage to anyone or anything. So yeah.
So for you, obviously, we mentioned that you joined the police, but did you have any family members that had served before you or served in the military? And did you ever think that you would go military, or was it always police for you?
That's again another great story, another great question. I don't know about you, Adam, but Top Gun was my favorite movie in the. As a young child, I thought I would become a fighter jet pilot because of Tom Cruise and Maverick. But no, I never had any like aspirations, or like never ever thought I would be a police officer. Never in a million years thought I would be a police officer. Had no inclinations. In fact, I don't have any family. Like I didn't grow up with any family. I only met one grandparent in my whole life. I never had close-knit family. I never had aunties or uncles around me. I had no one around me, in that space. So and from my, as you get older, you start looking back into your family history. Looking back, there's no family members that were ever a police officer. And it's quite interesting because I don't know where it came from.
Yeah, right.
Short answer is I don't know where it came from. There is some I think there was some steps that came before that made it possible for me to become a police officer. But if you ask some of my friends from my childhood, they're like, oh yeah, we could see you as a cop. And it wasn't until I was a detective and one of them said to me, oh, you were always going to be a police officer. And I was like, what do you mean? And they were like, well, you would come, if someone was being bullied, you'd come flying across the freaking quadrangle with a group of people behind you going, telling people off and going, don't you do that? You are not allowed to pick on her or him or, so I was always kind of looking out for the little guy, even when I was little. I mean, my brother was the first person I was ever advocating for. And I remember when he was in primary school, he was such a shithead, and he got in trouble by a teacher, and this teacher was standing over him, pointing her finger down at him and yelling at him. And I didn't even know what it was about, but I was in year 7, he was in year 5. And I just remember flying up to this teacher going, you do not talk to him like that. He is just a little boy, blah, blah, blah. I mean, he probably deserved it now looking back, but I was so defensive of him. And I remember being in fights for him, and his bullies he had a lot of bullies because he was always causing shit. And, I would jump in and tell them that I was going to bash them if they didn't leave. And mind you, if anyone listening has ever been to Port Hedland, you'll understand why. It's like the wild, wild west up there. But so I've always had this sense of right and wrong, and looking after the little, someone who's could look after themselves more to the point.
So for you, you mentioned that there was no there was no family members that had served before you, and for you. So talk me through the process of joining the police, and what year did you join the West Australian Police?
Yeah, so I mean, so to get back to a little bit of child, because this is a bit, it comes from like a place of like that right and wrong. I was actually kicked out of home at 15, and I spent the next 13 years trying to prove myself to my parents and prove myself to the world that I was worthy, because I don't know if you've ever had issues with your parents, or being told you're not good enough or whatever, and that's what happened, is that my stepmom and I didn't get along. She as I got older, she got more a lot more nasty to me, and said a lot of horrible things that made me not think that it was worth me being around and stuff like that as a teenager. And then when I got kicked out of home, I actually happened to move in with my boyfriend at the time, who's now my husband, 27 years later. We're still together. And but him and his family, which was such a risk on his family's part to take in this girl that had only been dating their son 3 months. And, they took me in, and I can never not be grateful to them. But it's flicked a switch in my brain where I was like, I don't know about you, Adam, but, when someone tells me I can't do something, I'm like, fucking watch me. And I hope that it's okay that I swear on your podcast.
Yeah, sure. Yep.
But yeah, I was like, fucking watch me. So from there, I went on to buy a house at 18. Like, I was 18 and 3 months up. Yeah. And from there, I bought my first home at 18 with my husband. He wasn't my husband at the time. And I went on and had, I worked in administration. I did job hop a lot because I was never satisfied. Like, I felt like I was missing something. And so I was like, I'd spend 3 months in one job. If it was really shit, I would leave straight after, or I'd spend a year, maybe, 18 months in another job. And the longest I spent in a job, I think, was 3 years, but that happened to be over 2 locations where I moved midway and tried something else. But so I drifted for 10 years, and then I got pregnant with my daughter, who and I had her when I was 26, so and 27, and she was the turning point. I think it was like a switch flicked in my brain. And I don't know, anyone who's listening, and when you become a parent, not all parents, because I know that there's some people who struggle with this, but I remember looking at my daughter, and she was 3 weeks old, and I was breastfeeding, or like in the middle of the night. It was just a really late night, and I just remember looking at her beautiful little face going, how do I help her become, independent, someone who feels like she can do anything, empowered, all of these things that I didn't feel when I was young, all of these things that I was like, I want her to know that anything is possible to her. And I think that was like a bit of the mama bear coming out, and a bit of the, I don't want anyone to go through what I went through as a child, with that lack of worthiness and that. And it's interesting because about 6 months later, I saw an ad in the paper. It was my local newspaper, and it had, we want we want female police officers, and the ad was the whole page, 2 pages of, flexible working arrangements, and, come and do something. And I was like, huh. And it stuck with me. Like, I looked at that ad, I read it while she was down for a nap, and I thought, oh, I could do that. And it stuck with me for days. And then I said to my husband at the time, I was like, hey, I'm thinking about applying for the police. Now, I know that you have never seen me in person, Adam, but I'm 5'1". I'm very short, and I can't jump for shit, and I'm like not the greatest runner, and I was expecting people to laugh at me, right? And some people did when I told them that I was going to join the police, but because they laughed at me, and because people were like, are you sure? I went, well, fucking watch me. So I went on the next 18 months of, like, by the time I got in the police, it was 2010. I honestly did not believe I would get in. I was like, I'm a more academic type person. I'm an administrative type person. Paperwork is my jam. I'm really good at it. But all that physical stuff I barely passed when I got through. Like, I just and it was during the global financial crisis. So, 2008, the global financial crisis, we had a downturn in like mining industry. Everyone was jumping to jobs like the police because they knew it was a guaranteed income. They couldn't get fired. They had 2,000 applicants at the time, and little old Kristi, 5'1" with a 12-month-old applies, or she was 14 months at the time, and just scraping by in the physical component. But I spent 18 months training from 9 months old to 2 years. I trained. I went and got a personal trainer. And the funny story is my neighbor, I used to live on a 5-acre property that was on a hill. And I used to run that hill whilst my daughter was having naps in lunch breaks. I used to do hill sprints and walk down hill sprints while she was having a sleep. And my neighbor used to think I was nuts. And she had a baby as well, and she would watch me through the window. She goes, her and her husband were like in awe of me running in the middle of the day whilst my daughter was sleeping. But that's what I did too, because I was like, I'm going to do this. My willpower was like absolute. And as it turns out, I got in. And yeah.
It sounds very similar to me in the sense of we've sort of tread very, very the same sort of road. And I'm very much the same, that if someone says you can't do something, it's fuel to my fire, and I just go, watch me. And it's like, you think I can't do, and it's the greatest. And I think, Kristi, it's very similar to me of that you're very much in the way that if you say that, someone says to you, you can't do it, you just go, watch me and I'll prove you wrong. And it's fuel to you. But I think, as you say, and listening back of what you said through your childhood of, your self-worth was just, and your self-esteem was just chipped away at and eaten away to where the point of where you go, well, the only way is up. And it's exactly that, having those dark thoughts and I was very much the same. And as you say, it just adds fuel to your fire, and you go, well, you know what? Watch me. I'm going to prove you wrong. And then it's funny because when you do achieve that goal, people go, oh, we always believed in you. We knew that you could do it. And it's like,
yeah,
but hang on, 6 months ago or 2 years ago, you were saying that I couldn't do it. Like, it's funny. It's very interesting. So that for me, like, that's inspiring of when you watch people do something, and like you say, doing the hill sprints and doing all that, and the neighbors are going, you're crazy, but you were just so determined, and probably for the first time, would you say, in your life that you knew you had a driven purpose?
Yeah, well, yes, I guess to an extent, because I had a purpose when I first bought the house at 18. I had a purpose then, because I didn't want anyone to ever I didn't know it at the time, but I didn't want anyone to take my home away from me. And I needed to feel like I had my shit together, and I needed to prove everyone wrong that, because everyone had something to say about me when I was kicked out of home, and most of those things were, that I was out of control and crazy, whereas actually no, I was pushed to, like, I was in an unwinnable situation at home. And but yeah, and when I became a homeowner at 18, then I had like this weird goal of having $1 million worth of property by the time I was 30, right? And I did have $1 million worth of property by the time I was 25, but my priority changed when my daughter came into the world, and I then sold all of that property off. And I was like, I don't need this stress. I've got a child. I want to worry about her. But then she flicked a switch in me that went, okay, I want to do something that's more. I cannot tell you how, why, what, but I look back now, it's been nearly 14 years. I look back and I go, it was always meant to happen.
Yeah.
So yeah, I joined, my first day in the West Australian Police was on the 25th of January 2010, the day before Australia Day.
So
yeah,
let's just go back before your first day. What do you remember of the academy, and what was the toughest part of the academy for you?
Well, that is the first day at the academy.
Oh, so right, okay.
That's when we're sworn in as a police officer. So in Western Australia, and I don't know about other jurisdictions, but in Western Australia, you do 6 months academy and then an 18-month traineeship after that, or apprenticeship, whatever you want to call it, and on the job training. But you do 6 months full training in the academy, and the first day was the 25th of January 2010. That first day was pretty surreal. Like, you know, I don't think I ever, like, I don't know about, it's so weird. Like, all of the things that I did throughout the years, I kept thinking, I can't believe I'm a cop. Like, it was never real. Even now, looking back, I'm like, how did I even do that? Like, it just feels like someone else. But anyway, the first day was surreal. You know, I was in a squad of 28 people, and some of them are still my friends today. And, you know, it was hard. I found the administration stuff a breeze. I found legal a breeze. You do like 6 weeks of legal studies, the first thing you do. And, you know, that was easy for me. All of the computer stuff was easy. You know, there was guys there that were more hands-on. They were like tradespeople or whatever before joining, and they struggled and I didn't. And I struggled with the, you know, the fitness stuff. I struggled with, you know, the beep test, and I struggled with like the 5K runs 3 times a week and stuff like that. And I used to actually get so nervous because I was such a poor runner, and I'm like not built for running. I'm sorry. I said that for a long, I had a physio say that to me after I left the police, and I had really bad shin splints and plantar fasciitis and all the problems that came from running that much in 6 months. That she goes, "You're not built for running, love." And I was like, thank you, I'm never running again. And but yeah, no, you know, I had so many issues with, like, I used to get so nervous. I'd be feeling sick before PT, and you know, I went through OSTU, which is the, you know, the training for like to be ready to use a taser gun, tactical on hand, and I was always feeling so sick and nervous. But again, I'm not the person who gives up anything. Like, I remember the first week of the academy, and I rang my stepsister, and I was like, "They're trying to break me. I think I'm going to quit." And she's like, "You're not a quitter. Don't be stupid. Just go home and have a good bath and relax, and you'll be back next week." And I never had that thought again. But you know, the first week was like, they tried to kill us, I'm sure of it. trying to thin out the weeds from the grass. But and yeah, I just have this innate ability. Like, I'm the first person, if there's something hard to do and I'm scared of it, I'm going to be at the front going first, because I just want to get it done. Sometimes that's a problem, because then I fuck it up, and then everyone learns what not to do. But you know, like, I'm the person at the front. Like, anything that's scary or scares me, I'm at the front.
But there's a little bit of nugget of gold there, where I love it where you say that, where it's the, like, you want to go first, but if you fuck it up, but you learn from your failures, and that's the greatest. Like, that's a nugget of gold for any young listener, any young player out there, that sometimes going first, whether you know you're going to fail or not, that's the reason to go first, is because you learn from, because if you're not failing, you're not trying. And that's, you know, that's such an important key point you touch on. And for you, what were you like, obviously, you know, you come from a country town, but what was it like when you first held your gun and shooting, and what was that like for you? Did you struggle, or was that okay?
I've always had this innate sense, like, I cheated a bit, right? So I went to a gun range the week before OSTU and went and shot a Glock, so that I knew what a Glock felt like, so that I wouldn't freak out in the OSTU. I was really nervous. In fact, I was nervous holding a gun for a long time before it became second nature. You know, because you don't get that much training in it before you actually have to use it, like, and you don't get that much training in it and full stop the end every year when you're using your firearm. You know, you have one recoil shoot every year, 2 if you fail the first one, you know. So you know, so that there's not a lot of training involved in it. It's not an accuracy thing, it's just a necessity thing. So
do you think there that, in looking back now, do you think that they should be doing more? Like, and I don't want to be too political like, do you think more training should be done, more shoots should be done a year to feel more comfortable, or does it eventually get to a point of it's just second nature that you get used to holding your Glock?
I would say that there needs to be more training in hand-to-hand and being able to have a conversation with people and de-escalate problems, because I think that is that is part of the reason why we're seeing an increase in, not to mention, I mean, there's a lot more violence going on, but I think there's an escalation, or there's a lack of skills in de-escalating problems. See, my husband, and like, we've been married for how long? Oh, a long time. Like, we're 27 years. So probably we'd been married 15, 16 years. And when I joined the police, and I said to him, hey, you know, are you worried about me joining the police? And he said, no, you can talk anyone out of anything. So you're right. And I think that was a skill that I just innately had. And I think people who have those skills are the better ones at de-escalating problems, and I had patience of a saint. Like, I could sit with a victim or a perpetrator or an offender or someone going through something really harsh, you know, a mental health assessment, and I could sit there and talk to them for hours about anything and keep them calm, make them feel safe. And that was a skill that I didn't realize that was so good until after I left the police, because I used to get shit for it. I used to get shit from my fellow coppers because they were like, oh man, you take too long. You're too, like, you should be a life coach. All you do is friggin' talk to people about life. And I'm like, but isn't that my job? My job's to make people feel safe and to feel heard. And, you know, so that, you know, so there's a lack of, I think there's a cultural problem where we think police are meant to be, you know, and there's this, especially towards the end of my job, and we haven't really talked about my career, but towards the end of my job, it was like, right, there's too many jobs and not enough people doing them. And so you're being rushed through, get through. You've got another job waiting, you know, they're stacked up behind you. So you can't really spend that time to make people feel safe.
So looking back now, so when you joined the police in that, you know, when you're in your mid-20s, do you think you would have, if you had to join when you were 18, say, instead of being in your mid-20s, do you think you would have been able to respond to those situations like you did in your mid-20s?
No, and I'm a firm believer of having life skills before you join the police, because it gives you clarity, and it gives you, you know, that clarity of that the world isn't all fucked up. Because when you're in the police and when you're in any kind of armed forces or wherever you're dealing with badness all the time, right? You become so fucking negative about the world. You get these blinkers on. And even me, with my 10 plus years of life experience as an adult, towards the end, I just thought everyone was fucked. And like, sorry to your listeners, like, this is real. You become so jaded and so negative and so angry with the world, because all you're dealing with is people who are being hurt. You deal with 5% of the population, and 5% of, you know, that's the 5% that's gone around doing all the bad shit.
Yeah, it is. I've spoken to a few police that have since retired or, you know, left, and they said the same thing that I know exactly what you're saying, that they said, yeah, you see it as black and white, and you don't see the grey, and so we'll get back to, we've gone a little bit off topic, but that's great. It's good. I like it. But so what was it like after 6 months, you march out? How did you feel when you were officially, you know, a sworn police officer, and where was your first station, and do you remember your first shift?
Yeah. So when we marched out, it was pretty surreal. Like, I still was in shock that I actually made it. But yeah, my first posting was actually to Karratha, which is in the Pilbara again. So I went straight from the academy to Karratha, and everyone was giving me shit because it was such a cream posting. They reckon it was the best posting I could have got. But I'm a country kid, so I was like, you know, happy to go back up there, because it was a great place to learn everything I needed to learn. And working in regional Australia, anywhere regional, it's like a baptism by fire, because you have to, all of a sudden, you are everything when you're in those places. You know, when you're in the city, you've got certain squads that handle things and certain specialists that come out and do things. But when you're in the country, you are it. And it was the best thing that I could have done in my policing career, and it was a great opportunity for me as a police officer. And it felt like going home, because it was just, close to where I grew up. So it just felt like I was going home. In actual fact, some of the people that I knew in the town were actually from my hometown. So I was sort of like, but my first shift, so I marched out. So my graduation was on the 6th of August in 2010. And when I graduated, I think I was up in Karratha maybe a week later. Maybe 2, I can't remember, to be honest. And so I started in August in 2010 in Karratha, and my first shift, that was an interesting shift, actually. It's funny, you don't think back about these things until someone mentions it, but I had 2 big jobs that sort of stuck out for me. One was a domestic violence incident where I had been the person that was being the perpetrator of the domestic violence threw a 2-liter bottle of Sprite at us, like a full bottle of Sprite, and it had some taken out of it. So when he threw it at us as we walked through the door, I just remember I was in front, and it was spinning coming towards us, like that oblong shape coming towards us, and it landed and it went through my feet, and it was my first shift. I hadn't even really found my feet yet. I was just anyway, and it was an afternoon shift, so I was on afternoon shift, and it went through my legs, and I looked down and watched it go through my legs. But by the time I'd looked up again, the partner that I was working with had already gone in and arrested him. I was so slow. And I was just my eyes were bulging out, and he'd grabbed him, because obviously he tried to assault us, and he was aggressive and yelling at us and stuff like that. So, and all I remember was that, and I promised your listeners I got better, but all I remember was I was running to the car to open the pod so he could get put in. I didn't have to do anything. I was just basically oh my God. But yeah, that was quite funny, and it's still one that I remember quite closely. But the second job was a young girl had been at a sleepover, and she'd been sexually assaulted at the sleepover. She was 11 years old, and so that kind of started me on my career. I think that's where I mean, by that stage, my daughter was 2.5. But by the time I got up to Karratha and started in the police up there, and that sort of started me on a journey. Because I was really my blinkers were taken off, and I was really oh my God, that was the first time I'd been hands-on with a young child dealing with that.
So you obviously, as you say, you got better throughout your career, and at that point, did you feel that the academy had got you ready for the dangerous world of what policing is?
Yes and no. Obviously, the judicial side, the legal side, the processes side, the procedure side, the computer side, all of that stuff, but the real people side, not so much.
So do you remember sort of when you're up there in the Pilbara, what sort of crime were you dealing with?
A lot of domestic violence, a lot of break-ins, burglaries and stealings of young people, lots of stolen motor vehicles. Not so much sexual assaults, but we'd have the odd one. Lots of child sexual abuse, sudden deaths. I went to a lot of sudden deaths up there.
Well, you mentioned. So, do you remember your first death knock, and how did you prepare for that?
So this is and it's interesting you bring this up again, because this isn't I know that this isn't going to happen. You're not going to air this till later in the year. But, it's Christmas time for us right now. And so at this time of year, I have my first sudden death, right? So December 2010, it's around the 16th of December, and it wasn't a death knock. So we didn't have to do a notification. I actually got sent to my first and suicide. And it was and it still it haunts me now. So I apologize to listeners if it's too much, but it sits rent free in my head, where I'm on an afternoon shift again. All the good stuff happens on afternoon shift. And we're driving around and we get a call, priority to this location. They found an unresponsive male. We get there, we're preparing. I'm preparing in the car. My partner's saying, right, we're probably going to have to do CPR. We're going to have to do this. He's like getting me mentally ready. Just follow my lead. I'll tell you what to do. I'd been in the job 3 months on the road, 3 months less than, and he's telling me what to do. And we get to the driveway, and this is what gets me every time. And there's a 7 or 8 year old boy on the driveway. And he's waiting for us, and he's flagging us down, and he's got tears running down his face, and he's saying, please save my dad. And that's what runs rent free in my head all the time. It turns out that the parents they'd been to a Christmas party that evening and had a beautiful time. The parents argued. Mum went to bed with the kids, and he went and took his own life in the backyard. And the little boy actually found him. And I'm talking 14 years ago nearly now, or 13 years ago, so he'll be an adult now. And I don't know where he is, I don't know what he's doing, but I think about him all the time. It's because one of the things that happened is that Mum had already started CPR. So as a first responder, we have to continue CPR until a doctor or an ambulance paramedic says that they have that there's they're not viable. And so we had to continue CPR for 30 minutes because where we were located, there was volunteer ambulance officers, and when they're on call, they have to come from home, they have to go and get their kit, and then they have to come out. So we did CPR for over 30 minutes. Another crew came in to help us because we had to switch out for 30 minutes with them. And in the end, the paramedics managed to get a heartbeat, but he was brain damaged or brain dead by that stage. And and the nice part of the story is that they donated his organs. So the fact that we kept him alive or kept his blood running meant that his organs can be donated. But that's the reality of the job. And I'm sorry for anyone out there that's a bit hard to hear, but that's that one job sits rent free in my head all the time.
Oh no, I thank you for sharing, and I think it just shows the human side of like it is that you've gone to a job that was and it's heartbreaking to hear that his own son found him. Like it's just really, and that's why Kristi, I started this podcast. It's to help people to say that they're not alone, and in that time, in that moment, had an argument, and then to feel that there was that only way out. That this, it's, and I always say it, and you've said it as well. We've had many conversations where it's not weak to speak. It's and I thank you for sharing that. And it's not heavy. I think people need to hear it, that this is what police and first responders face on a day-to-day basis. This is these are the type of things that do. And I thank you for sharing that, because it is a bit it does sit, and it's raw. And thank you for being so raw and honest.
No, thank you for letting me. And that's a story that I think everyone needs to hear, because one of the things that I said recently on my socials was that I know people are going through such tough times right now. Like there's so many people hurting financially, emotionally, so mentally. Your kids want you more than they want presents under a tree. It hurts to not have the money to give them everything they want. It hurts to not, be able to put on the full show. But I tell you what, like 10 years down the track, they're going to want you there versus the tree, the present under the tree. And I think what I learned from my childhood is that you do survive those like tough times as long as you've got each other. And like I have good memories of living in a caravan. There was some really cool stuff that we did, and I don't have bad memories. It's about even the fact that my parents were alcoholic and stuff, because I sit with that and I go, they were dealing with what they were dealing with, and your kids need you. And that's why I think that one story really sits with me, because I think that reminded me that it's so easy to to forget that.
Absolutely, and the a great point you touch on there is that the materialistic things don't matter. It's in the scheme of things that as you say that presents, and most of the time when you get a present, unless as a kid you grow out of it, and you never grow out of having your parents or family around. So no, very very good point. And for you, did you have really good mentors in the first part of your career, or was that sort of was there
Yeah,
people that you could rely on? Or
I'm a bit conflicted with that question, because yes, I had good mentors, but I also had mentors that were quite they were very, like, one of them, for instance, this one mentor I had, he said to me, "You don't dog on your mates." My first shift in the police, you don't dog on your mates. And for anyone who's listening that isn't in the armed forces or the police, or it basically means you do not, no matter what, you do not dob in your mates or complain about them to, and my whole career I never did it. And I never ever complained about anything, about anyone to anything. Anything that I ever dealt with, and there was a lot of bullying in my career, and there was a lot of other problems that I didn't, because one of the things is I'm not black and white, but I am very much, I am a rule stickler. Even now, like playing a board game the other night, I was like, "That's not in the rules," and everyone's like, "God, settle down. You can take the girl out of the police, but you can't take the police out of the girl." But I was a very strict rule follower, and so when people did the wrong thing, and I can understand when you have to step outside the lines for whatever reason and whatever purpose, but I was very, very, very. It was like cutting. The one time that I had to do something, I was compelled to do it, and I didn't have a choice whether I did it or not.
It's interesting you say that, because I'm actually talking. So I've got a podcast, and it's going to be very controversial, especially with the New South Wales Police. I've actually got one of the original whistleblowers back in the 1990s coming on the podcast, and I've met her, and she is still to this day looked down upon, and it's really sad, because at the end of the day, and I'm very much, and I'm going to say it on this podcast, and I'll say it when I do her interview, is that everyone's got a story, and I'm impartial to you shouldn't get this person on, or you should get this, everyone's got a story, and at the end of the day, you all join the police service to protect and serve us, and lock criminals up. And I'm sorry, sometimes there's a line there that when police cross and go to the other side, they do deserve to be punished, because they are now a criminal themselves, and to the moral courage it takes to stand up. And that is why I absolutely want to get this person on, because the moral courage that she showed to speak out against an organization which she knew would be career ending. It's I think I take my hat off to her and say the moral courage that she has shown, and now still all these years later is still looked down upon as she's a dog. And I'm like, well, no, she's not a dog. And it's very, it just that's why I want to tell her story, because so many people have told her story and twisted it, but I'm going to the source. And it's a really good point you touch on, that that morally, there's things that you do look at, and like you say, there's that time where you go, I followed it to the letter, but absolutely, no.
The thing that I would say about what that person and that person saying that to me, what it did was, and don't get me wrong, if I had have seen someone doing something illegal, abusing a child, like that is straight up, you deserve everything you get. If I had have known someone stealing, someone doing something, but the few things that I should have complained about were the bullying to myself, or the times when someone, there was one guy that was, I felt like he was emotionally and mentally unstable and shouldn't be handed a gun. And I went to my direct line supervisor and said, "I am really concerned about this officer." I never stood back when I knew that people were at risk. I never ever did. I went to my direct line supervisor, and but then what do they do next? Like, I've done what I should do, but what do they do next? And that's where but that don't dog on your mates thing, that in my personal career, it stopped me from sticking up for myself. It stopped me from saying, hey, this is not okay. What you're doing is not okay to me. I just took it, and it was career ending for me.
And we'll get to a little bit later on in your career, but I want to go back to in 2011. You were selected as a specialist child interviewer, and how did that come about? And what was that role?
Yeah, so I was still a probationary constable, and the detective's office, they were in charge of like investigating child sexual abuse, and we had a detective's office attached to our police station, and basically the OIC of the detectives came out and said, look, we're looking for more specialist child interviewers. Is anyone interested? And I was like, yeah, like, remember that first shift, and I went and spoke to that 11-year-old and got her statement in regards, or not her statement, but I went to her, first responded to her thing. That stuck with me. That stuck with me. And having a 2-3-year-old at the time, I was like, yeah, I want to be a specialist child interviewer. I want to talk to kids. I had a little baby at home, and I just thought, I love kids in general. Like, I love other people's kids more so, but and I thought, I'll do that. So I put my hand up, and I was a probationary constable, so they weren't keen on sending me on this training, but no one else put their hand up. No one else wanted to do it. And so they did send me off. And in about I think it was in the March or April. So I'd barely been a year in the job, and they sent me down for this 5-6 week training. And in that training, I cried the first 2 days. I was so, like, it was like having your world turned upside down and blown apart, because I had a 3-year-old daughter at that stage, and I was like, oh my God, my daughter is never going to be safe again. Like, how the fuck am I meant to save my kid from all of these predators? Because, they were sharing information like, at that stage, it was 1 in 3 girls and 1 in 7 boys were a victim of child sexual abuse by the time they were 18, and 90% of all child sexual abuse is by someone known to them. And, things like that. And we watched videos of child sex offenders, prolific child sex offenders, and how they groomed and preyed on children, and what they picked, how they picked victims out, and and just like stuff that I had never even heard of before. I grew up quite obviously, yes, I had like that emotional abuse as a child, and some physical abuse as a child, but I wasn't sexually abused that I knew of. And and all of this information was just being thrown at us so that we could prepare to be able to interview kids. And I was just absolutely shocked. I remember ringing my home and talking to my husband and going, please don't let anyone near her. And she was in daycare at the time, and oh my God, it was fucking horrible. But it renewed my fire in my belly to ensure that my daughter was not a victim if I could help it.
So for that, were you working alongside like psychologists and psychiatrists as well, or was that
mostly police? So there's we back then, and this is 2011, back then they had a special, they've got specific training that is designed by psychologists, psychiatrists and child experts. And it was there's, I can't remember her name, but a certain doctor had come up with this interviewing technique that was to ensure the integrity of the evidence given by the child, to ensure that police and the adult in the room didn't interfere, or there was no leading the conversation. So they come up with, they call it TEDs. So tell me, explain to me, describe for me, show me. It's a TED's way of asking kids. And so the specialist child interviewer is trained to be able to, first of all, be able to deal with children. Second of all, be able to interview children, and third of all, be able to help, because it's a very extreme process of putting a child in a room with a camera. You and the child are the only ones in there, so you have to have a certain level of investigative legislative information. So that's part of the course as well, where you learn about child sexual abuse offences. You know, what are their elements of the offence, so that you can make sure that, because I don't know if you've ever had anyone explain this to you, but when a police officer or a detective or someone is going to put charges forward on to someone or to the court, you have to have every element of the offence covered. So, for instance, a common assault, for instance, is a person assaults another person. So when I speak to you as a victim, Adam, for instance, and I get your statement from you, a person, the person who has assaulted you, how they assaulted you, and you're the other person, right? That's the simplest form I can explain it in. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does. Yep.
So in your statement, you're going to say, I was at this time, this date, in this place. This person came up to me, they punched me, and these are the results of that punching, and this is what's happened since, right? That's what the basis of your statement has to say, because those are the elements of offence. A person assaults another person.
Yep.
In sexual assault and sexual abuse cases and child sexual abuse cases, obviously it's a bit more convoluted, and so a child has to then go, I was maybe here or here at this time, maybe. You know, it's not a big deal because we can work around that. This person did this to me at this time. And you've got to get them to say that. If you don't have all of those elements, you've then got to find someone else to come in and say, well, I know it happened on this date or this time or around this date range, and I know this happened, this person was here with this child, you know, sort of thing. But if you can get a child to say all of that, within reason, like there's some variables to that, then you've got the evidence enough to put a charge to the court.
So for you, and dealing with children who have been abused or, you know, sexually assaulted, is that another element that is hard to get their trust, or because are they in fear of, you know, adults, because adults are the ones that have, you know, done this to them? How hard was that, and did you have to try and work different strategies in gaining their trust? Like how hard was that?
Yeah, so for instance, a child that's one-off abused or has a very good support network behind them. It's not a parent or a caregiver that's actually abused them. They generally are easier to work to get their evidence, because first of all, as a child interviewer, you learn how to build rapport with your child, the child that you're interviewing. So you spend time with them. It's not just a come and sit in this room and let's talk. It's we're going to play a game. We're going to talk to you. We're going to get to know you a bit more. We're going to find out what your favorite things are. We're going to have that maybe an hour before you even sit down in an interview room. This is how it should be done. Mind you, that's not how it's always done. We're going to sit with you. We're going to get to know you. We're going to get to, and they're going to hopefully feel like some rapport and some trust in that person, because in the next instance, we're going to go sit in a room together and we're not going to have an adult or a caregiver with us. And the reason for that is because children often try and protect their parents and their caregivers, and they won't talk or won't share what's happened with whilst their parent or caregivers around, if they don't feel safe to do so. So that's part of the process. And then at the end of the process is getting them to a place that they feel safe. So you're going to talk to them about protective behaviours and body safety and early warning signs, and you're going to talk to them about the fact that they can always come back and talk to you if they ever need to again. Because a lot of the times, just like all memories can be repressed. Memories can, that sometimes we don't remember everything that happened in the one incident. You know, our memories are funny things. And so children sometimes will tell you a portion of it, but they won't tell you the whole lot, or the next one. So sometimes it would be multiple interviews if there was multiple offences. You know, I had many times where I knew a child had been sexually abused by someone in their family, but they came 5 or 6 times and they didn't disclose. And those were the hard cases, because it's been going on generationally, or it's been going on for so long. They don't have a safe home. They don't have someone safe that they can disclose to at home. They don't know that person's still in their home. And a child will only say something if they feel safe and they know that they're not going to be further problems, further issues. And if the sexual abuser has been grooming them for a long time, or or has been abusing them for a long time, and has basically, and when I say grooming, they've basically told them that, you know, if you tell anyone, I'll go to jail. If you share it, if you tell people, we won't be friends anymore. You know, all of the things that groomers use and abusers use. So that's also playing in the back of this child's mind that, you know, if I tell police, this person's going to go to jail, and I don't want them to go to jail. I just want them to stop. I want them to stop abusing me, and I want them to stop hurting me, and I want them to just love me the way that they're meant to love me. Because again, like I said, 90% of all abusers are known to the family or part of the family. And in actual fact, the latest statistics from the Australian Bureau of Statistics said that 49% of all child sexual abuse is done by a direct family member, and it's something, I think it was 37% is a father or stepfather, and then it goes down from there into other, you know. So we're dealing with people that live in the home with the child generally, or the child sees regularly.
It breaks my heart because, you know, I've got a little niece, and I love that little girl, you know, and would not, you know, I wouldn't want anything bad to happen to her. It's just, yeah, it breaks your heart to think that people do this to, you know, and as you say, and you've seen it yourself, is, you know, children are innocent. Like we've got to protect their innocence. Like you know, that's our job. Like we're there to protect them, to get them to, you know, adulthood, to then, yeah, and then they go on and, you know, they're a protector as well. That's essentially what we all are. We're protectors of the, you know, the children, and it's just really sad to see that there, and you would have seen it a lot more than, yeah, like over your 10-year career, you unfortunately saw a lot and were exposed to more than what, you know, I know about. You only read about, you know, what you see on the news and that, but you dealt with it day to day. But I just want to go back just for a second before we get into, you know, you doing becoming a detective, and I want to go. So when you did this training, were you part of were you still based, or did you have to come back to Perth, or were you part of a squad, or how did it work?
So when I did the training, I just went back to Karratha and resumed my general duties job. And if there was a child abuse case, or if there was someone that needed child interviewing, the detectives would call me up. I'd be on standby. I'd have to have plain clothes there because you don't interview children in uniform. And I would go off with the detectives. And in fact, in my 4 years in the Pilbara, I was flown to places like Onslow, which is a couple 400 k's away, and I was sent around, and I followed the detectives around on their jobs. You know, I was part of an operation in Roebourne, which is, you know, 50, 60 k's from Karratha, where there was a massive amount of young children being sexually abused by perpetrators in that town. And, you know, it took years for police to gain trust with the young people in that town, because they were being abused by relatives, by other people in that town. And it was insidious. It is insidious in that environment. So they didn't trust police, and they don't trust police because, you know, police come in and take away their dad or their grandfather or their uncle or their mum or whoever. And so, yeah, it took years, and we, you know, and eventually we did lock up quite a few of the sex offenders in that town who were using drugs to coerce children into, you know, sexually abusing them and stuff like that. One of the tools that they were using. So, yeah, I did that for like the next 3 years, obviously, and then in that time I went, you know what, I don't want to hand these files off to the police anymore, to the detectives anymore. I want to be one of them. So that's what happened.
So for you, looking back now, and for what do you think drew you to, do you think it was your own daughter, or what drew you to this line of work? Because you're a mum and you're exposed to some pretty, like, in your face, like, it takes a special kind of person to do the work that you did. What do you think the draw was to go and, you know, want to do this work?
I reckon I've had a lot of time to think about that question. At the time, I didn't know this. I don't think I understood it, but I think the draw is that I wanted to be, I feel very strongly about child protection, and I think it was in part it was because of my own childhood. In part it was because I didn't feel heard, listened to, safe. I didn't feel like I had anyone in my corner when I was a child, and I didn't feel like anyone cared. So, you know, and again, you know, not, I don't look back at my parents and go, you know, fuck you or anything like that. I hate you. I'm actually very close to my mum and my dad now. But in my childhood, I think there was so much confusion for me as a child, because my parents didn't know how to reassure me, and I wanted to help other kids. And in fact, you know, when I used to speak to some of the children that had been abused or weren't being listened to by their parents, you know, to be that person to say to them, I believe you. You know, I'm sorry that your parents don't believe you right now, but you know what, one day it won't matter. You will be, you know, you're going to be okay. Like, just to reassure them and be there. I think I didn't realize it at the time, but I do think that was part of it. Like, my own childhood, that lack of understanding and that lack of love and support was one of the drivers.
And you got very, very good at what you did, but in that time before you became a detective, I understand you did a forensics course. And
yeah,
what was that? Were you sort of looking to go down that path of forensics, or what? Why did you choose the forensics course?
Well, again, and I've never told this story, but there was one particular detective that did, for some reason, I don't think he liked me very much. And don't get me wrong, like, don't forget, like, I was a junior when I came into the police. I was 29 years old by then, and you know, and so I was a mum, and I was pretty certain about my personality. I had very solid ideas of who I was. So I wasn't the type of person to sit down and go, if I didn't agree with something, I spoke up. And so me and this detective clashed all the time, because I had to work so closely with them. And anyway, he said to me, yeah, you're not ready. Like, when I said I wanted to become a detective, like, he was so negative. And he had said to me, yeah, you're not ready. I wouldn't be putting your energy into that just yet. You need some more time. Like, he was a fucking asshole, and he's still a fucking asshole. I don't know. I haven't seen him in years, but he just made me feel. And again, it was that person saying to me, "You're not good enough. You can't do this," right? And I was like, I had enough of that as a child, and of all the people in my life who have told me I can't do shit. I was like, "Fuck you, asshole." Cry in the corner, but fuck you, asshole. So, so what I did is I hedged my bets. So so in the meantime, whilst I was applying to become a detective, I applied to become a forensic officer, because I'd already become a basic forensic officer. I could take fingerprints, I could take DNA, I could, you know, do some basic forensics. That was part of, like, as I was saying at the start, you know, when you move to one of those regional places, they give you all the training, because you're going to need it, right? And I had some basic forensics, and I'd had some hits. I got a fingerprint on a car once, and I got some DNA on I had some really good results. So when I put my hand up to go and do the Forensic 1 training, which meant that I could become a forensic officer in a forensic office in a regional centre or in Perth, you know, they were like, yeah, she's actually quite adept at this, like, she can do this. So I went off and I learned how to become an actual true forensic officer, and I did some training in that. But at the same time, I was applying to become a detective, and it was not through and in fact it was not through it was because I just wanted to make sure that I had one or the other. I wasn't sure whether I wanted to go forensics, but I thought, you know, I like that side of things. It's not so bad. And the cool thing about policing is you can do many careers in one job. Like, there's so many aspects to the police and so many things you can go down. What I learned when I did my Forensic 1 training is actually I didn't want to be a forensic officer. It was boring. And all you did was burglaries and stolen motors and swabbing, and, you know, and yeah, that was great, but that wasn't what I wanted to do. In actual fact, funny story, funny, not funny actually. I went to a job after my Forensic 1 training, and it was before I got interviewed for my detective training and it got chosen. And the job was so we get a call again, afternoon shift. Always the job's on afternoon shift. So we get a job, and I don't know if your listeners don't know where Karratha is. Again, it's in the Pilbara. It's in line with, say, I don't know, Mackay-ish area in Queensland, and we go to this job. We get this phone call going, I've just been assaulted. It was a male. I've just been sexually assaulted. If you don't get here, I'm going to kill him. And I have, so the boss on night shift there, he was like, yep, we'll get there soon. And it was in a mine site, so in a mining camp, which was, 40, 50 Ks out of town. And we were the only car on. So they were like reluctant to send us straight out there, because what if something serious happened in town? There was no one to go to it. So sort of sat on it for about half an hour, and then he rang back and he goes, if you don't fucking get here now, I'm going to kill him. And so we went, okay, we better go to this job. And it wasn't my decision. I wasn't the one making those decisions, but it was this senior connie, and I was still a junior connie. Anyway, so off we go. I'm in a car with a crusty old senior connie who was like, oh. Anyway, we get there, and this guy walks out, and it was like 11 o'clock at night. It was crickets. There was no one around, and this man in a white shirt, young guy in a white shirt, probably 20 or so years old, in a white shirt, hands up in the air as we drive into the car park. He was waiting for us, and his hands are covered in blood, like from fingertip to elbow, blood. And I looked at my senior connie mate, and he looked at me, and we were like, oh, fuck. Anyway, so we get out, and he goes, I've killed him. And the guy I was with, he's like, you're under arrest. And I've gone, for assault, because we didn't know what was going on. And when you arrest someone in Western Australia, you have to tell them what they're under arrest for. If you don't, it's an illegal arrest. So you have to go, you're under arrest for assault, and start giving them their rights. Anyway, and so I've gone, and I said, okay, where is he? And he's gone, he's over there. And like, this guy was obviously freaking out. And then I walked over there. I couldn't find it. He goes, the door's open. And if you've never been into a mining camp, it's just dongers and dongers and dongers. Like, they're just rooms, tiny little rooms, one after the other. So everything looks the same, right? I couldn't see any blood, and it was like late at night. No one was around. I couldn't see anything, couldn't hear anything. So I go back to the van, and I say, and at this stage, my partner has, put handcuffs on this guy, and he's trying to keep him calm. And I'm like, you're going to have to show us where he is. And so at that stage, I'm thinking I'm walking in on a dead body. And so he leads us over to this room, and my partner's got a hold of him, and I have to go into this room. I open up the door, and I'm like, hello, police, anyone there? Hello, police. And I'm walking into this tiny little room. Can't see anyone, but on the other side of the bed was this man who was naked on the other side of the room, and he had been bashed within an inch of his life by this young fella. Anyway, it turns out, so me just having had my forensics training, I say to my partner, put him back in the car so that he can help me, but the guy was still alive. So I'm calling for backup. I'm calling for paramedics. And again, I said, paramedics were voluntary and stuff like that. So they had to come from, like, it was going to be ages. I'm like, bring the camera to my partner, because I was like, I've got to take photos of this scene before I move him, so like my brain was working like that. And so I've taken photos. He put him in the recovery position. He had been bashed so bad that we couldn't actually give him mouth to mouth or ventilate him if we had to. The only thing we would have been able to do was actually chest compressions if he had to stop breathing. So I was telling him, keep breathing, because he was so like, he was breathing, but the breathing was so bad, and it was a death rattle. And I was like, keep breathing. I'd been in the job for 3.5 years by then, and I was like, keep breathing, mate, keep breathing, you're going to be okay, but the funny thing is when it was a serious offense, like this man ended up being, the paramedics came, even they freaked out when they saw him, how bad he was. They came, they took him to hospital, and all the photos that I took and all of the evidence that because the young guy who'd bashed him, what had happened was this man had gone into his room. So they'd been drinking together at the wet mess. The young fella had gone to bed. This guy had gone into his room, and he woke up with him masturbating him. And the young guy, like, no, he had, you know, was like, I'm like, get the fuck away from me, what the fuck? And that's when he rang us the first time, goes, I've been sexually assaulted. You need to get here before I kill him, because I'm fucking going to kill him. And then we took our time, because my boss didn't say, you know, go straight away, because we were the only van on. Like, these are the decisions that people don't realize, is like, you know, and obviously, you know, anyway, it probably could have been avoided, but at the same time, the guy survived. He didn't have any brain damage, which was what we thought he had. You know, he ended up having reconstructive surgery, and his face was reconstructed, right? The sad thing to this story was, obviously, the young fella got charged with grievous bodily harm, because if the man, the other man that had been assaulted hadn't been had medical assistance, he would have died. But because we got there when we got there, and because we, you know, made sure he was safe, he, you know, he had a full recovery, etc. So the young fella got charged with grievous bodily harm, and he pled guilty because he knew he had done the wrong thing. He was really, in actual fact, he was not a bad kid. I think he just saw red and went off. So when he pled guilty, the detectives then charged the other guy, the one that had walked in on him and started with indecent assault. And the saddest part to this story is he took his own life when he got charged with indecent assault. So after all of that, because he had a wife and a family, and he took his own life. But to even make this more freaky, so then obviously all his charges were dropped. The young guy's charges were dropped, because once you don't have a victim, you don't have a case. I don't know if people know that, but that happens all the time. If someone takes their own life, there's no case. And so the young guy got off, and he never, you know, he never got sentenced or anything like that. And about 3 months later, he was in a car accident and died.
Oh, far out. Wow, what a tragedy. It's a tragic, like the whole case is just tragic. Like, you know, like as you say, it could have been avoided, and yeah, like they both end up dying in different circumstances.
I know. And then so that was my case that I used for my detective training interview. So
let's talk about that, because like, I know I've spoken to a few police officers, and so is your detective's course, it's a full-on course. How long was the process for you to become a detective?
So you have to apply, and you have to be chosen. It's not like just because you apply to become a detective, you actually have to get selected. So you have to obviously show certain qualities and traits, and you have to have a good history of, you know, being able to do your job. They don't want, you know, detective training is like, so in my case, you have when you finish your apprenticeship or your traineeship as a police officer, you get a diploma of public safety and policing. When you finish your detective training, and you get an advanced diploma, so it's equivalent to an advanced diploma. And so in Western Australia, the detective training is only 6 weeks total, but then you have another 18 months of traineeship, apprenticeship, whatever after that. So so during that time, you're basically honing your skills as an investigator. So you're focusing on, you know, what kind of investigative strategies there are, how you can you know, the legislation, you're honing in further in, like, because detectives only deal with like the really hard, or really crimes, basically serious crime, you know, the odd burglary and the odd stealing, yes, if that's a link to a freaking unlawful wounding or a GBH. So you're honing in on your investigation skills in that training, and then you do 18 months of training after that.
And then do you get given, like Queensland, they get a gold badge, like a detective? Do you guys get that as well, or?
You do get a badge, yeah. So once you're fully qualified, you get your detective shield. But unfortunately, when I left the police, they took that all off me, so I don't have them anymore.
Oh, that's right. That's kind of shit. But yeah, we'll get to that. We'll get to that later. So for you, when you first joined, Did you envision that you would become a detective, or did you just think, oh, I'm going to be general duties? I'm just going to
No
be,
idea.
yeah, I'm just going to be a uniform copper for life, or?
No idea. Honestly, I really sometimes guess where my head's at when I choose things, but I just follow what I go. No, when I first joined the job, I thought, fuck, I found my home. This is where I was meant to be all along. Like it felt like really good. About 3 years in, I started struggling because, as you can tell, I'm quite a compassionate person. I give a huge amount of compassion and care to people. I love spending time talking to people, making them feel safe, making them feel heard and respected. And a lot of the police expect you to be hard and expect you to not have that level of care because there's not enough time. And I was trying to fit into that hard mold, if that the best word for it.
Square peg trying to fit in a round hole.
Yeah, and I wasn't fitting. And so I actually, within 3 years, had depression. It was situational, obviously, because I was trying to be someone I wasn't. And I was trying to be that hard ass and that, tough person. And I'm a really soft person, really, deep down. I care a lot about people and people's problems. And so that's when I started feeling like, okay, something needs to change, something needs to give. So it actually, and I've said this at the start, I've been with my husband 27 years, but we actually had a separation at that time as well because our relationship was struggling, because I guess you have to change when you become a police officer.
Yeah, you see the world very different, don't you? And
yeah,
and for you at that stage, like you mentioned, like your separation, was your husband back with you when you became a detective, like at that point?
not long afterwards. Yeah, so we had a year separation. We both went and worked on ourselves and got help. I guess the beauty of, again, like if I hadn't been in the job from 18, I don't think I would have had that awareness to be able to do that stuff, to realize that the world isn't all black and white and everyone's shit and everything like that. I had the awareness to know that the world has lots of shades of grey and life isn't all bad. So I went and got help. I went and started talking to a therapist. I went on antidepressants for a period of time. I put myself back together and I made changes. My husband did the same thing, and then we ended up reconciling just as I became a detective.
So for you, was that a proud moment to finally and stick it up that bloke who said, you're not ready to be a detective?
Oh, yeah, you should have seen his face when I got accepted. Oh my God, he was so good. And I'm not that kind of vindictive type of person, right? I'm not. I don't get pleasure in making other people feel stupid. But man, I tell you what, he said, he goes, I didn't even know you applied. And I was like, well, why do I have to tell you? Like he was so shocked and everyone was congratulating me, and his face, he was like dirty. I thought, fuck you. Like,
and
you guys,
you proved him wrong. And for you, like, did you always we'll get to that you became a detective at the child protection unit, but for you, were you going to, like, did you want to go down the homicide path, or did you always know that you were going to be back working with kids again?
Yeah, pretty much. I think it was always a done deal, but I did. I had worked on some homicides with when I was in Karratha, and I had done 2 homicides. One actually happened to be an infant death, and I knew straight away with working with those guys that I didn't want to be in homicide. I was like, nah, not for me. But it's funny, like some people would say child sexual abuse and investigating child abuse isn't for them, and homicide would be more for them. But homicide was definitely not one of those. I put my name down. So when you get out of detective training and you go and get your first posting, you meant to spend 18 months. So you spend like 8 to 9 months in each spot, or it's 2 years total. And so I put my name down to go to child abuse squad. I think I might have said major fraud, but I would have been bored shitless there. Numbers and me don't mix. Maybe a couple of other, like, I think might have organised crime, maybe. I don't know. But I got child abuse straight up. I did a couple of months in a detective's office in the suburbs, which was I had been working on a proactive team, and for anyone who doesn't know what that means, so reactive crime or reactive offences are where you're going in after the fact it's happened, and proactive means that you're actually looking for problems. So you're looking for drug dealers, you're looking for people who are stealing motors, you're locking them up, hopefully before they do too much damage. So I was in a proactive team for 6 months before I went into child abuse squad, and I was like, oh my God, this is so much fun. I love this, doing drug tours every day and stuff like that. But funny enough, those guys also said to me, why are you a police officer? You spend all your time talking to the drug dealers. And I'm like, I'm just making sure they're all calm.
So did you have to move, like, obviously you're now detective, so come back to the city, or?
Yes, yeah. So I moved back to the city. That was my first posting, like transferred back. You have to do your 2 years in Perth, basically in the city. So yeah.
So without going into too much detail, is there a couple of cases that stand out to you in that time of when you were part of that unit?
What, the child abuse unit?
Yeah, the child abuse unit.
Yeah, I actually got some of the. So I'm grateful for this because and a lot of people look down on this kind of investigating, but or coppers, I think it's boring, but I was actually grateful. So I got put onto an operation which was to investigate the historical child sexual abuse cases in institutions. And as boring and as dry as that sounds, it actually was quite it is quite hard, because a lot of these cases were identified through the Royal Commission into Institutionalised Child Sexual Abuse, and during that Royal Commission, the person who was reporting their abuse in the institution was able to tick, would you like police to contact you? And some of these cases had been reported to the Royal Commission. So by this stage, we're talking 2014, 2015, that they had reported them for 2, 3, 4 years ago to the Royal Commission. So they were like, they'd already dealt with it, talked about it. And some of them were like, yeah, no, I don't want to deal with this anymore. I don't want police. And so those were the ones we would file. And then some of them, there was one case, and it sticks with me because I worked with this person for 3 months getting their statement, and he was so downtrodden, and his life had been so hard because of the abuse he received by the Christian brothers and by the in the institutions he'd been put in, all because because for the worst reasons. There was no reason for him to be in there. He was taken off his parents because nowadays we would say he was autistic, but back in those days he was considered what was the wording they used to have him taken away from his parents? It was like a wayward child or something like that. There was actually a charge in the Child Protection Act or some bullshit act that they had back then, or the Welfare Act, I think it was, where they could take children off parents if they didn't go to school. And this young man, well, he was 7 when he was taken off his parents, and they were elderly. He was 7, and I'm talking the 70s here. He was taken away because he wouldn't go to school because the nuns used to cane him. And so he used to run away from school all the time. So he was put into the system at 7 because the nuns were caning him in this school that he was in. And then he spent, good portion of his childhood being sexually abused. And he was never able to work. He was an amazing guitarist. He couldn't go into pubs. He was scared of public toilets because so if he went to the shop and needed to go to the toilet, he had to rush home because he couldn't go into a public toilet because he was abused in a toilet so many times. And, this man, during that process, he had tried to report it to police in the 70s, and the police kept taking him back to the Christian Brothers and to the boys' homes that he was being abused at. And so no one listened to him. So he didn't trust police. But in the end, I sat down with him for 3 months, and, he took his statement. It took 3 months, every week, meetings with him. And one time he came to me and he said, I don't think I can do this anymore. Because the sad thing for people who have been victims of historical sexual abuse, and here's the stats on that, the average length of time between the time someone's abused, a child's abused, and the time they tell the first person is 24 years. So for 24 years, most people sit there and they don't tell anyone, or they might have tried to tell someone as a child that they weren't, and then they weren't heard, or no one did anything, or they were dismissed. And so they keep it with them for the next 24 to 30 years. And 30 years is the average for men. And so, so this man had, you know, his whole life had been turned around, and he had no, you know, he couldn't work, he couldn't go to pubs. Luckily, his parents had some money, and he was left a whole heap of money when they died, and he was surviving off that. And but halfway through getting his statement from him, and I'm talking hundreds and hundreds of incidences of abuse, but he couldn't remember all of them. And then, like I was saying, when you start recapping them or retelling them to someone, more comes back up and more comes back up, and then you're living in it again, as with PTSD, right? PTSD, you know, I was explaining about that father at Christmas, and my brain does that all the time. Like I'll be just driving my car and I'll get a flashback. And so he was having all these flashbacks, and he came to me and he said, I can't do this anymore. And it was halfway through getting his statement. We were like 2/3 of the way through, and I bawled my eyes out, and I just said to him, I said, I know that you feel like this is like not pointless, but please think about continuing. I care about you, and I care about you getting this off your chest, and I care about us trying to do something. Because at that stage, one of his perpetrators was still alive. And yeah, so he ended up continuing because he said, no one has given a shit about me until you.
That's pretty powerful. And as you mentioned, because, you know, earlier on, as you said, that if the deceased, if the person who is accused passes away, there's no case to answer. So some of these historical cases would have been very, very hard to get a conviction because, as you say, like most of the perpetrators, they would have passed on. Is that correct?
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, one of the priests that abused him had passed away. One of the other abusers, we couldn't identify him because he was too young to know. He just knew he worked as his caseworker from welfare, and so he ended up finishing his statement. Like I said, it was over 100 pages long. It was 3, you know, like multiple offences. And so when we finished the statement, I said to him, look, all right, I'm going to go and do some. And in that time, I had been identifying like potential other victims and potential witnesses and speaking to the ones that were still alive. Most of them were dead. They'd taken their own lives in the time that, you know, it had happened. And now, and one man was able to, you know, give further evidence, like he'd been abused by the same person. And so I was starting to get like, you know, a little bit excited that I was able to, you know, get this person and I was able to charge them with something, you know, or at least interview them and put the charges to them. And so about 3 weeks after this man's statement gets finished, I don't know what made me do it, but I just looked his name up again in the system. So, you know, we've got systems and it's got all your details, where you live, your date of birth and all of that. And he died in the 2 months that we were finishing the statement. Like he'd died 2 months before. I burst into tears, and when I went and saw him, I was like, I am so sorry. And I was just so sad that we didn't get to like charge this person, this horrendous human who, by the way, had been a sexual offender in England and had moved to Australia and continued to sexually offend. No one stopped him. He was a bastard of a man, a horrible, horrible man. And but the one thing that this man said to me, and I don't want to say his name, but you know, I know that I still think about him all the time, and his case probably left the biggest impact on my heart, because people don't realize how much child sexual abuse affects their victims. You know, it's worse than murder, in my opinion. Child sexual abuse is worse than murder. When a victim of murder or homicide they're dead, they no longer feel pain. The family, yes, they're the ones suffering through the loss of their loved one through such violent means. But when a person is sexually abused, it is a life sentence for that person. Everything about their life changes from the minute they're abused. and they have to live with that for the rest of their lives. And it's not something they ever controlled, ever had choice over. And that person that has abused them has so much power over them. And, you know, there's so many victim survivors out there that do such amazing jobs at putting their lives back together and working through all this stuff. But, you know, it would be so much better if it never happened. And don't get me wrong, like, I don't think that we can wish away the pain that we go through. And yes, it does help to make us the people we are today. Like, some of us can look back and go, oh, well, actually, I'm glad that happened, but I don't think you can, you know, it's not fair. Child sexual abuse is not a fair crime, and the penalties and the sentences that people get are not worthy of the crime that they're committing. But this fella, he actually said to me when I went to see him, and I went to see him personally to tell him the news, he just said, thank you so much. You've actually freed me from a lot of what I've been through, because someone actually listened to me and believed me. And like I said, this man lives with me in my soul, I think, because and everything I do from there was about, you know, helping people at least be heard, at least be validated, and to know that someone cares.
I was just about to say that the validation of their story and that they're they're a worthy person, and what has happened to them is wrong. And as you say, it's a life sentence for them because they have to deal with that. I know I've listened to some other victims who it sent them into a spiral into organized crime, and and exactly that they've told their story to a relative that they were abused, and then they end up going down a life of crime because their family member goes, oh, whatever, just get on with it, and circumstances. And as you say, it's a life sentence for them. Like, they've got to deal with that, they've got to process that, and it's a hard. And for you mentally, how are you at that point? Like, how are you with everything that you were seeing, the cases, that you being a mum? How are you mentally at this point?
So that would have been about 5-6 years in. I was coping. I was coping to a point. I had a really good friend at the time that I could call and like offload onto, because you can't offload those stories to your friends and your family. They don't want to hear it. Like, they don't want. A lot of people don't want their little bubbles burst. They don't want to know that the badness is out there. You know, that they don't want to hear these stories, because it means that they have to like look inwards and realize that they actually don't have as much control over their lives as they have. I don't know. Sometimes I sit here and I ponder these questions for hours, but like, a lot of people don't want to hear it. And when people like me who have lived it and have witnessed it, we sit here and we tell it so bluntly and honestly to people, because I'm not going to apologize for blowing your bubble up, unfortunately, because people's bubbles need to be blown. They need to realize that it's out there. And, you know, 1 in 4 Australians is a victim of child sexual abuse, more than 1 in 4. And, you know, we've got so many people out there hurting, you know, that's, you know, it's just, it's one of the reasons, and it's not an excuse, but it's one of the reasons why we have such a mental health problem, why parents struggle to connect with their children, why parents struggle to parent their children, why parents are struggling. And I mean, that's where my work is now, which we'll explain soon. But you know, like, if we can just help people heal from that, if we can handle these situations better and we can help them heal, then we can do so much better. There will be less intergenerational trauma.
Absolutely.
And all of the things that come along with that. So, yeah.
So when did you know that there was it was time to go and resign from the police?
Yeah, so I spent the last 2 years of my career in another regional centre as a detective, and when I got to this regional centre, I didn't realise, like, when you're in the city, you kind of got blinkers on, because unless you're working in the child sexual abuse squad, or you're working in the organised crime squad, or you're working in the homicide squad, or you're working in whatever squad you're working in, unless you're working in those areas, you don't realise how much of that crime is actually out there. You know, so when I was working in the city, I worked in child sexual abuse, but I was working in a specific unit that was dealing with specific things. Although I helped on other jobs and stuff like that at times, I was just constantly focused on historical child sexual abuse. So I know how badly people have been affected by this, because I spent 9, 10, 12 months of my time talking directly to survivors. So then when I got to the regional centre and I started dealing with child sexual abuse case after child sexual abuse case, blinkers were blown off. I was like, fuck, this is a problem. But I ended up being a specialist child interviewer in that area as well, because I was in a regional centre. So I'd interview the children. I would investigate the child sexual abuse case. I would, interview the perpetrator, charge the perpetrator if there was enough evidence. And then part of that job was also to manage child sex offenders. And so in that 2-year period, I was doing it all, along with other cops, other detectives. But it got to the point where I was having severe panic attacks before work. And unfortunately, I would say that, and I'm sure a lot of police officers can attest to this, is that policing and police departments aren't very good at managing mental health, and they are not very good at giving the management the tools to help manage mental health. They're not very good at identifying mental health challenges and problems. When I was in the child sexual abuse squad, I had to have a psychologist interview before and after I left. And I think I might have had one in mid-time, whereas I never had another one except for when I started indicating to my upper management, that I was struggling and I had severe anxiety. And I had PTSD at that time, but I wasn't willing to share that. I wasn't sharing that because I was scared that I was going to get, first of all, vilified. They tried to move me when I started sharing that I had anxiety. I took some time off. They tried to get me to leave. Not the police, but the district. They didn't want me to be in their district anymore. They tried to move my family, even though my family was happy where they were and I was happy where I was. I just needed better support. And so they basically became like the last, not full 2 years, but the last 12 months was pretty rough. And it was when I got diagnosed with PTSD by my GP, and she just said, because by that stage, I think my brain was basically saying, if you don't fucking do something, I'm going to do something. So I was having I don't know if anyone can relate, but I would be trying to sleep at night and my anxiety was so high that I couldn't sleep, but I was also having like a movie roll of jobs that I'd been on. And when I got diagnosed, I absolutely broke down. And my daughter at the time, she was 11, and she just said, Mummy, can you please leave the police? I don't want you to be in the police anymore. And, she didn't remember me not being a police officer. She was 2 when I joined. So, that was pretty impactful. And I listened to her and I resigned the next day.
And for you, obviously build up of, trauma, all that you face through your time of being in uniform, then dealing with the cases that, dealing with the, scum of the earth and people the
badness out there.
Yeah. Pedophiles and all that sort of thing. And for you, there's only so much that you can compartmentalize and push it to the back. And then, as you say, it was your daughter that just said, Mummy, can you, I don't want you to be a police officer anymore. And as you said at the start of the podcast, your daughter was the reason you went into the job and the reason that you left the job. And for you, when you resigned, did you feel that you had lost your purpose, or was it you just knew, and how did you find that purpose again?
Yeah, I dragged my resignation out for as long as possible. I was actually, to try and manage my mental health, I had gone down to part-time, and so I was only doing 2 days a week at the time, and during that 2 days a week I was doing child sexual abuse, child interviews. So I'd get into work and they would put them all on my 2 days, and I would do interview after interview. And one particular interview, basically, I walked out of that interview with this beautiful little girl, and I just said to the partner that was there, so when you're a child interviewer, you have a detective with you to help you, not help you, but they're there to go, hey, can you make sure you ask about this? Can you make sure we try and cover off on this, just in case you forget anything or miss anything? But and I just said to the detective that was working with me at the time, I just said, this is going to fuck me up. Like, it was so bad, and this little girl was so resilient and so beautiful, and I just went, this is going to fuck me up. And it was the one that sort of broke the camel's back kind of thing. But when I left, I dragged it out as far as I could. So I was only doing 2 days a week. So I did 2 days a week for 10 weeks before I actually finished on, and get this, I finished 10 days and 1 year after, 10 years and 1 day after. So my last day was the 26th of January, 2020. And so I made sure I got that 1 day in, because I was worried that they wouldn't pay me my long service. So I was like, yeah.
You're like, no, I've got to get that long service. I've earned that, which you absolutely had. And for you, like you mentioned that you talk to the victims a lot. That was your specialty. And did you speak to the perpetrators as well? Like, and what was it like going, because I'm fascinated by this, of what was it like going into like a pedophile's mind? Because in their mind, it's normal, isn't it? What they're doing in their mind, they think is normal.
Yeah, so that I'm not gonna lie, most of the pedophiles will lie through their teeth and never admit to their abuse, never in a million years. The ones that did were the ones that, like, I had one guy confess to a child sexual abuse that no one had ever come forward for. So he was, in my whole career, 10 years, he was the only person that ever, first of all, admitted to his offences, and admitted to an offence that no one had actually, a victim had never come forward for. And I was like, he was truly remorseful. Like, the only other, and it wasn't my case, I was working with another copper, was another case of where he was basically, he'd found God, and so he was repentant because he wanted God to, like, obviously he was highly religious by that stage, and he'd abused his daughter, and she was an adult, and it was historical and stuff, and he'd been repentant and, you know, whatever. But that wasn't my case, but he admitted to it as well. Quite often they never admit to it. They'll make up the worst lies. They will deflect, that Darvo thing, you know, deflect.
Yep.
You know, so that they're the victim, that kind of thing. Or that's what you mostly just deal with. For me personally, you know, and I did actually raise alarm bells to my supervisors that by doing the child interviews and by interviewing the perpetrators, it was actually very hard, and it was a problem. And I raised it to my supervisors, and they did nothing about it. So then I continued to do that, and it caused problems, obviously. You know, it's really hard to be sitting across the table from someone who sexually abused a child that you've sat across the table from, and they've been crying and telling you about the worst days of their lives. But I was very, in the job, I was very good at controlling that part of myself and putting those two things in two separate rooms, basically. But that's probably what broke my brain.
God, you're stronger than me, because I just want to reach across the table and just strangle them. Like that,
Yeah.
you know, that's something that I'd do. And yeah, thank God I'm not a cop, because yeah.
Sometimes you have heaps of evidence, and it's so fucking, you get so much pleasure out of, like, them denying it, and then you're putting evidence out in front of them, and they're fucking shocked, and they're like, oh. But in most cases of child sexual abuse, there's no evidence other than what the child says and what you say.
Yeah, right. So it's really the cat and mouse game of you got to try and get them to fall on their sword, as they
got to lie.
Say.
Yeah, so my job was to do as much investigation as possible, so that if I said, hey, where were you in this date, between these dates and these dates, where the child had been abused, and they lied and said they were somewhere else, that you could prove that they weren't, they were there. And so that they looked like the liar in the interview, you know?
Yeah.
And a lot of these people are narcissistic, they're sociopaths, they are full of their own self-belief, like that they haven't done anything wrong, like you said. And so they can't see that you're lining them up with all of this evidence, you know, because you give them an opportunity to say their side of the story and to, you know, hey, you know, tell me about this time and where you were, and, you know, what was going on then. And, you know, you give them all of this rope to hang themselves on, and then you just pull them in and go, well, actually, I've got evidence here to suggest that you were here and here during this time. What do you have to say about that? And they're like, oh, but they keep lying, and then they look like dickheads. So that's your job as an investigator. And I was very good at that at times. Like, you know, I'm not saying I was the best investigator in the world or the best interviewer in the world, but I was very good at giving them lots of rope and letting them hang themselves on it.
And I think what shines through to me is that on the other side with the victim is, like you said earlier on in the podcast, that you people would say to you, oh, you're too kind to be a police officer. Sometimes, you know, that with the work that you, and, you know, the people that you've dealt with, empathy goes a long way, and compassion goes a long way, and trying to just emphasize that you're there for them, and to be there and to support them. And I think, yeah, like you enjoyed the hunt of, you know, just like you were going, yeah, well, we've got this evidence, we've got that evidence, we've you know, but on the flip side, you had that compassion and caring nature to help the victim, which I think is in any instance, especially in the chosen field that you specialized in, and I'll say that you specialized in it, you need that, because otherwise, yeah, you won't survive in that field.
Yeah. And I think there's a lot of good detectives out there that do this work, and they are just as good at what they're doing. You know, it's the ones, I would be more worried about the ones that don't care anymore. Like, they shouldn't be doing it anymore. If you don't get teared up or upset by a child, so one of the really shitty things that happened was one of my last victims that I went to court with before I left, she was only 4 when she was sexually abused by her father, and then at the time she had given evidence to it, and I wasn't here at the time, and she had given evidence and to a specialist child interviewer and described in a 4-year-old's detail. They don't give a lot of detail, and they're unable to give lots of detail. She was able to describe that he had sexually abused her, but the investigation team at the time wrote it off, insufficient evidence. They did interview the father, but the father, and he was no longer in the life of the 4-year-old. The minute the 4-year-old disclosed to mum confronted the dad, he packed his shit up and left. Now, this is one thing that people need to realize. Child sexual offenders that are guilty do not stand up and fight you. They will run far and fast. So most of them in my time, the minute they're confronted, they're off. They're packing their bags and they're out of that house. And a lot of people don't realize that. And so they will not fight the mum or fight the family member that comes to them and says, hey, have you done this? They fucking pack their shit and they're out because they're scared of being caught. And so that is, for me personally, that is one of the first warning signs. If you go to them and say, hey, you know, such and such, our child is displaying these weird sexual behaviors, and they pack their shit and they're out within a couple of days or even that day, I'd be fucking going, oh, well, that's almost guilty for me. But anyway, so this guy packed his shit up and left and didn't even defend himself. And then so she'd called police. The little girl was interviewed. She got disclosed. The dad was interviewed. He deflected and lied and deflected and blamed other people, and it was written off insufficient evidence. I come along a couple of years later, pick up the phone, like a random phone call. Mum says she's 7 now. She's remembered more. I get the old case file. I see the old interview, and I bawled my eyes out. Like, I cried like a baby because this little 4-year-old girl had disclosed what had happened to her. I was angry that these investigators, because I knew from my experience in the child abuse squad, that was enough. He could have been charged. That was up to the court. It's never a police officer's job to decide whether they're guilty or not, right? As much as we think we know whether they're guilty or not, we don't get to decide their penalty or their sentence. This court does. All our job, or was my job when I was a police officer, was to ensure that the evidence was there and that they got put before the court. And that was my job, and that's what I had to remind myself time and time again. I'm not here to defend whether you're guilty or innocent. I'm here to put the evidence to the court and let them decide. But yeah, so I ended up opening the case back up, interviewing the little 7-year-old again, interviewing mum, got her more evidence, interviewed the other kids that were in the house, got their evidence, found out that another child at the house had been sexually abused. And he ended up, again, deflecting, blaming other people, saying, well, he was a huge manipulative liar. It's all written in my book, this story, and in not as much, in a bit more detail, but not as much. And anyway, and then he ended up getting found guilty and got 6 years, which is not long enough for what he did, but 6 years is better than nothing. And he appealed his court. So that was 4 years ago, and he appealed his, that was denied. He went for parole, that was denied. So he's going to do the full 6 years. So I'm hugely grateful for that.
100%, and so you should be. And you mentioned, like, and we'll get back to your out in a minute, and you mentioned your book, and we'll get to that in a minute as well. But how important is, like, so any young police officer, how important is, knowing your brief when you're in court? And, were you ever intimidated when you went to court and you had to give evidence?
All the time. One of the things that even doesn't matter how much evidence you got, if you're really invested in your case, doesn't matter how much evidence you got, you're always worried you don't have enough. And in the cases that mattered, I always worried that I didn't have enough. I mean, if it was a simple traffic matter and I was going to court because, Joe Bloggs decided he didn't like me giving him a ticket, and no word of a lie, I hated doing traffic. But if you nearly run me over in my car or nearly did something, you're getting a ticket or you're going to court, right? But the few times that really mattered, I was fucking on tenterhooks. I could barely sleep. I was stressed. And both the few times that happened, I won them all. Like, I didn't win them all. They won them all. Because I fucking dug up every rabbit, down every hole, every stone was unturned. I made sure everything was covered. And both of those people, the two main cases in my last year, both were found guilty.
So for you, and did you have anyone that did they sort of help you get prepared, or it was just something you had to work out yourself?
Nah, by that stage I was like a senior constable, or nearly a senior constable. I didn't have any, I had my supervisor and I could talk to them about it, but generally, like, in that last couple of years, I didn't feel like I moved to the regional centre for my family, but it was a bad move professionally, and it ended my career. So but I look back now and I'm like, well, that was better off anyway. So
well, so that's a good segue into, so you get out 10 years and 1 day.
1 day.
Yeah, 10 years and 1 day. And then you have the unknown of, well, what are you going to do next? But then sort of we hit a COVID pandemic.
Yeah.
And for you, you'd already, as you mentioned, mentally you were working through the process and where you were and lost purpose. What did you then go into, and how did you find yourself again and a new purpose?
Yeah, it was hell. It's funny because one of the detectives said to me before I left, oh my God, like, why would you leave the police? Like, seriously, go and transfer somewhere else. And I had considered that. But he's like, go and transfer somewhere else. What happens if a major incident happens and people lose their jobs, and what happens then? And then 3 months later, COVID hits and people losing their job left, right, and center. So I had actually done some training to become a personal trainer in the last year, and I was teaching some fitness classes when I first left the police, and doing some personal training. It was, I thought that's what I wanted to be doing. It was just sort of like a segue to doing what I do now, really. I think it was just a way for my brain to be okay with quitting or retiring. So I was doing that, and then of course COVID hit and gyms shut down, and that was the worst thing that could have happened for my mental health at that stage, because and it sort of spiraled after that, and I went into a very dark place. I was having flashbacks, PTSD flashbacks. I used to have, if I heard sirens, I used to have go into like a complete spiral, and it was pretty rough for a couple of months, well, probably 12 months afterwards, if I'm going to be honest. And there was times there that I didn't want to be around anymore. And I guess the only saving grace was my daughter and my husband. My husband he's always been amazing. He's the type of person that he's never told me what to do. He's never said no. He doesn't say no to me ever. He just wants me to be happy. And so if I say, right, we're moving to Thailand, he's like, okay, when are we going? Or if I say I'm going to join the police, he goes, okay, good luck. Like he's the type of person like that. So and I'm very grateful for his support in all of this. So yeah, when I left, he's luckily able to financially support us. He works in mining and has always been in mining. So and yeah, I just went through some really rough times and did my best. I never got medicated for it. I had this aversion to being medicated. I had this motto in my mind: if I can't feel, I can't heal. So I had to go through all of that to feel it. Otherwise, if I had have taken, and there's no I'm not saying don't get medicated at all. That was just my chosen pathway. I think medication has a really important role in these places but I had the space. I didn't have to go and work a full-time job, or I didn't have to function fully. I was very lucky to be able to heal in my own time. And I'm not going to lie, it took a long time. So, I'm here for nearly 4 years later from my resignation date, and I only just feel like I'm coming out the other side of it now. So, but in that meantime, I started writing a book. So I had the idea before I left the police. I just kept thinking, if parents knew what I knew, they would do things differently. And that's pretty much the premise of what happened with my book. I just started writing ideas down and thoughts down and stories down. And then, 2 years later, I had a book, and I actually joined a book writing group towards the end, because I was like, if I don't freaking get some help here to finish this shit off, I'm never going to finish it. And Adam, you're releasing a very special book soon. It's like fucking giving birth to a baby, mate. Like it's terrifying.
Yep.
and having those thoughts with feelings, words out into the world, the idea that someone else is going to read them and they might not like them, like, it's crippling. But as we've learned from what I said earlier on in the podcast, if I fear it, I'm going to fucking do it. So I was like, nothing's going to stop me. I did end up self-publishing my book, and it's called Operation KidSafe, A Detective's Guide to Child Abuse Prevention. And, it's everything that I can think of that could help a parent protect their kids or their loved ones from child sexual abuse, both in person or online.
I'm halfway through your book at the moment, and I highly recommend, and I'm going to give it a plug. So guys, get out and buy Kristi's book. It is unbelievable. It is just holy shit. And as you say, you've only just touched in the podcast on certain things. And yeah, so I highly recommend for any parent out there and any police officer, go out and buy the book, because it's, as I say, I'm halfway through it, and holy shit, there has been some moments where I've already had tears. So yeah, it's a real.
Thank you for reading it, Adam.
No, that's all right. And
I know it's not everyone's cup of tea, and I know it's a hard book to read for some people. If you've never had any, if you've never been exposed to child sexual abuse, it's a tough read. I've had people contact me, not many, but I've had a couple contact me going, they've got young children, and they're like, I don't know if I can read this. And I'm like, if you can't read that, just read the ends of the chapters where there's advice on what to do. I said, you don't have to read the whole of it to get the gist of it. So
absolutely. And for you, was that a cathartic process? And did that help? Yeah. And that help you process your whole career, your childhood, and where you got to at that point? So as you say, you joined that writing group, and for you, was that sort of part of your therapy as well and part of your healing?
Oh, yes. It was an amazing, at the time I didn't realize how cathartic it was. It was like releasing, like the chapter on myself, and the purpose of the book isn't about me, but I did have to write a bit about myself to explain who I was and why I was writing the book, right? So I wrote that whole chapter, and that chapter was so much longer, and then I had to cut it back so far because I was like, nah, people don't need to know that. People don't need to know that. So what's in the book is like only a small smidge of what it is, but the book, it was so cathartic to write it, and it was also part of that. In writing that book, I came to the realization that I can do so much more now for the prevention of child sexual abuse than I did in the police. When you're in the police and a child comes to you because they've been abused, it's after the fact, it's after it. And parents would honestly say to me all the time, I just wish I had known what to watch out for. I wish I had known the grooming signs. I wish I had known, because we'd be telling them, oh, well, it sounds like you've been groomed. And people would be like, oh, but what is that? And you'd be like, oh my God, can't you tell what they are? But really, people don't know. They don't realize how prolific grooming is and how easy it is for someone to convince you that they are safe and they are and they're that you should leave your child with them, or that that they're not going to harm, that they need you or you need them, sort of thing. So and grooming doesn't just happen in child sexual abuse, it happens in domestic violence, it happens in online grooming, all of those things. So it's become my passion is to make people aware, to make adults aware, the grooming and predatory behaviors of abusers, and the red flags to watch out for. That's pretty much my passion and mission right now.
So where can people get a copy of your book?
Yeah, so you can get it on Amazon, directly on Amazon. So that also means that you can get it on Kindle. Or I also, at the start of the year, you might do this, Adam, I recorded it for an audiobook. So it's available on Audible and Spotify on audio. It's actually available on lots more places on audio, but they're the main two. So, you can get it there, and hopefully it helps.
Oh, I think absolutely it will, and it's funny you mentioned that when you put it out and you say it's like a giving birth to a baby, and it's funny because there's people that, and I've already had it, Kristi, where people have actually walked away from me already, and the book isn't even out yet, and they were mentioned in the book. So
yes,
yes,
that happens. I was actually really scared because I don't mention a lot of, like, we've talked way more into depth about some of the stuff that happened to me whilst I was in the police, and I don't mention any of that in the book because, or not much anyway, because one of the things that I don't want people to, so my mission is to protect children, to help you protect your children and to protect the loved ones, and to know what to watch out for so that you can keep your kids safe and the kids and the children in your life safe, right? That's my whole focus. If I continue to talk about what it was like to be a police officer and the shitty people that I worked with and the bad supervision that I had and the bad management and how bad they are at mental health, if I talk about that, it takes away from the child abuse. So if I could say anything, is that all of that happened, it just made me stronger, made me more determined. I look at that now and I go, you couldn't get, like, because I think you asked me when we were talking before the podcast, you said, what was the result of all of that? And I walked away from the police thinking I was the worst police officer in the world, that I was weak, that I was fucking useless, that I couldn't do anything, it basically brought up all my childhood trauma and it added to it and made me feel like I was not worth being around anymore. And that's what that did. But yet here I am still standing 4 years later, and my mission is even more resolute and absolute. I'm not going to deviate, and no amount of things that have happened to me can change that. So I think it's created concrete.
Oh, absolutely. It's like the rose that grew from concrete, and that's you. And so what are you doing now? And I understand you're doing a lot in the space to protect children and working with schools. And well, a question to you. How do parents get better and how do we as a society get better educated on dealing with protecting children online and like how do we do that?
First of all, we have to realize that without awareness, I mean, you've got your head in the sand if you're not going and making yourself aware about these issues. You know, I've dropped some statistics during this podcast about, you know, the 1 in 3. So current statistics is 1 in 3 girls and 1 in 5 boys will be sexually abused by the time they reach 18. And 1 in 4 adults in Australia has been sexually abused. So that's current statistics as of April this year. In Australia, we now know that also through research that 1 in 6 Australian adult males are attracted to children and young people, and that's through an anonymous survey where men filled in an anonymous survey. They're never going to be found out, and they gave their they were asked a series of questions about their likelihood to abuse or if they had abused a child, and 1 in 10 men in that survey had physically abused a child sexually. So we know that what all of this is saying, and this is all scary this is for me my everyday bread and butter, but for you guys listening, what this is telling us is that, first of all, the man in the white van is a myth that was created in the stranger danger era of the 80s and 90s. We need to stop thinking that it's strangers that abuse children. It's the people in their lives that are more likely to abuse them. In fact, 45% of all child sexual abuse is by another child. We also need to be more. So what that tells me is that awareness is the start, supervision, and education. So we need to be better supervising our children and not trusting the people that we think we should trust. You know, we don't have better protection or be more protective of our children with strangers and with people, even with family. Like we naturally assume that we can leave them with family and trust them, and unfortunately that's not always the case. And we shouldn't trust other children to babysit our kids. You know, it's not their job. We're adults. We chose to have these children, you know, and so we need to have better protections in place. I created a list of 15 qualities of a safe person based off my experiences. It's on my blog on my website for anyone who wants to have a look at it. And in there, it's just outlines what to watch out for, what indicators make someone that I think makes someone safe. It doesn't mean they're 100% safe, but it just means that if they show those kind of personality traits and behaviors, then they're more likely to be a safer person around children. And then we also need to educate our own kids. And one of the things that I could say wholeheartedly after I did my training as a specialist child interviewer in 2011, and I still believe this today, is we need to teach our children protective behaviours and body safety education. And for anyone who hasn't heard what that is, protective behaviours is a set of rules. Every person has the right to feel safe, and we can talk with someone about anything. So first of all, that's the two themes. And then second of all, the body safety rules are we teach ourselves and our children what early warning signs are, how it feels to feel unsafe within our bodies. A lot of people don't even think about that, but we call it intuition and our gut feelings as an adult. Our kids have those gut feelings and intuitions when they're children, but it might come as sweaty hands, a headache, stomach ache, butterflies in their stomach, shaky knees, whatever. And we need to teach our kids to identify them and to identify why they feel that way. Then they need to know who they can come and talk to, who's their safe people in their life. We don't get to tell our kids who's safe. Like, we don't get to say, you can talk to grandma, or you can talk to grandpa, or you can talk to dad or mum. Who do you feel safe with? As a child, who is your safe people? And we also then talk to them about private and public. So what is a private part and what is a public part? You know, that mouth, our genitals, anything covered by bathers, private and public movies and pictures, nudes and inappropriate and appropriate touch. We need our kids as young as 3 to start learning these things, or 2, even birth. We can be talking about stuff. We need to set boundaries up for our children, like consent. If we tickle our child and they say no, we need to stop and we need to model consent to them, because when someone doesn't model consent to them or doesn't respect their no, then they know to come and talk to us and tell us that someone is not listening to them. All of these are such good lessons, and this is how you're going to protect your children.
And I want to bring it into you, and I want to talk to you about this because, when I was going through high school and it too, in the 80s and 90s into the early 2000s, social media and the internet wasn't really around like it
No.
is today for the kid. And so how do parents better educate? Because social media is like, it's there, it's in your face, like,
Yeah.
and how do we better educate kids on being safe on the
Yeah.
internet?
We need to get our heads out of our asses and stop thinking that we know better than our kids, because our kids actually are digital nomads. They've grown up with it. It's our fault that they've got them. I mean, we're the ones who give them to them and not set out rules, boundaries, supervision. You know, I think when it comes, and I mean that like in the most loving way, people, we just need to get out of our own way and have conversations with our kids. We need to ask them questions like, hey, you know, I've always been, and I've written it in the book about how to talk to kids about this stuff, but I've always been a big firm, after speaking to thousands of children, all they need for us is to have conversations and to be approachable parents. We need to be able, they need to feel that if they come to us, we're not going to tell them off, we're not going to yell at them. We're going, because here's the thing, you pointed it out, Adam, we didn't grow up with this stuff. So we don't have a clue really what they're dealing with. We've just got this assumption that, well, why would a child send a nude to another person? Why would, what, they know better than that. But yet what we're seeing is, and here's something to process, sending a nude behind your phone to another person is, we used to go and hold hands and send love notes and ask someone out and then maybe get a kiss. Their first sexual experience will be sending a nude, most of our children. They will send a nude before they ever have their first kiss. And so how are we talking to our kids about that? How are we explaining what that is and what the consequences and what the repercussions of that are? How are we doing that? Because it is our job, not the school's job, not anyone else's job. I've got a nearly 16-year-old daughter. I know what our young people are dealing with, and all of them are dealing with the fact that they can't even go to their parents and talk to them about this stuff. So what kind of rules and beliefs and thoughts are you having about what should and shouldn't happen, and how do you talk to your kids about that? We need to probably, like I said, pull our heads out of our asses and realize our children are dealing with a whole different world that we ever dealt with, and they will most likely send a nude before they have their first kiss. And so how are you going to help them understand that and what that means and what the repercussions and consequences of that action is? Because it comes down to your relationship with your child.
That's pretty powerful to ponder, actually. That, yeah, you're right. Like when you and I were like, yeah, you're right, holding hands and, having a kiss and all that, as now kids today, you're right. Well, I'm not a parent, but I'm I'm an uncle, but we're playing catch up to the kids.
Yep,
like we're playing catch up, and I'm glad you brought that point up, because it's sort of, and I don't want to sound bad here, but it's sort of an arrogance that we think that we know what our children, and I'm not talking from, and I'm not talking from parents' perspective, but it is. We know best. Well, no, well, actually, do we? And that's where I think that's why the work you're doing now, I think, to better educate parents is so important, because you can be that link. You can sort of bridge that gap, and, like you say, help parents communicate with their children better.
I think there's this thing called affluent neglect right now. Like, this is a new form of neglect. Neglect used to be not getting food, not getting, clothes, not being supported. Now we have, and it's really horrendous, to think that, because I'm such a hands-on parent. I'm a very protective parent, probably through my own childhood experiences and also through what I saw as a police officer. I'm such a hands-on parent, right? I still miss shit. I'm not saying I'm perfect at all. I have fucked up so many times and felt like a fuck up and had so much parental guilt, and I know it's a tough job, and I'm not telling anyone how to parent their children. But affluent neglect is where parents have all the money but no time. And so they give their kids devices, they give them things, they give them the best clothes, shoes, food, whatever, but they spend no time being present with their children. And what we're seeing is children who have no boundaries, no restrictions, no supervision, and they're off doing all of these things because who's to stop them? Who's to talk to them, for one? It's no different to the latchkey kids that friggin' used to get, come home at dark and have a key to get inside. No parents were there, right? It's another generation of that happening right now. And but what we're seeing is, if you aren't present with your children and you're not giving them this guidance and this supervision and stuff, that's where we're seeing kids go awry. But we also need to realize that our kids are being exposed to this stuff at a younger and earlier age. The first exposure to pornography is 8 to 10 years old. So on average, 8 to 10-year-old, your children are more likely to be exposed to pornography. So if they don't know what they're seeing, and if they don't know what to do, then what's the repercussions to that are children who are disturbed, upset, have PTSD flashbacks, and I've seen that happen, or as they go through puberty, intrigue, pornography addiction. So what we're seeing is 12-year-olds with pornography addiction because they've seen porn. No one's noticed that no one's talked to them about it. No one's explained it to them. And, then they're looking it up. So as parents who are worried about their young people on devices, restrict their devices, supervise their devices, have conversations. 3 simple things that you can do. And here's another kicker, which most parents don't think about. When you give your child a device, they don't own that device. You are loaning it to them. You are the one who owns that device until such time as they can pay for it themselves or they can pay their phone bill. So don't let your child become the boss of that device. Honestly, I have had so many fights with my daughter over this shit, and I just say, I don't give a fuck.
I love it.
Literally.
Love it.
I don't care. I'm your parent. I am here to protect you. This is what I'm saying. If you don't like it, I can take it away. I'm not saying that is because I don't take her device off her for any, and she's nearly 16. She does pay for her phone bill now, but I don't take her device off her for making mistakes. I don't take them out. Our kids are making mistakes online because they don't know where else are they doing it. Where else have they got an opportunity to do these things? So what we need to make sure is we don't take it away. We turn whatever happens into a lesson, and we help them understand it, and we help them not make it again. And we always, last thing I'll say on this subject, because it's probably been the longest podcast ever, the last thing I will say is that your kids need you to tell them that you love them unconditionally, no matter what they do. That's all they need to know.
Better education is power. So exactly right. And for you, what programs are you working on to go into schools now?
So I personally would rather work with adults and parents versus kids, because our kids don't need me coming in and telling them what to do, because they are very, very educated in this space. But our parents are the ones who need more education, and they need to know that they're not screwing this shit up, and they're not your kids, unfortunately, even my daughter will say, "You're the worst parent in the world. Everyone else's mum and dad let me do this." But when you get advice from me saying, "Hey, you're not a bad parent, you're actually a good parent, you're doing the right things, keep going, mate, like, well done, buddy," it just gives you that peace of mind to say, "Oh, I'm not a bad parent," because our kids are really good at reminding us that everyone else is doing it. Everyone else is allowed to be on Fortnite and they're 8 years old, or everyone else is allowed to play GTA 5 or whatever, be on Roblox with no restrictions, or, whatever. So, they're a 9-year-old. Everyone else is playing at night, 11 o'clock at night. Whatever your kid wants, they're always going to argue with you over it. So, to have someone in your corner and going, "Hey, you're actually doing the right thing here. This is actually safe." And I can say it from a place of, I've seen what the worst case is. I've seen kids who have been abused, groomed, bullied, whatever. I can tell you from that place that, so my goal, my aim, I've got the book now. I've got an online safety course for parents. It's Device Safety 101. I'm hoping to tweak it a bit more because I think it could use a bit more tweaking, but work in progress. I'm doing lots of presenting, so I'm doing lots of presentations to business and schools, teachers, parents. So I can come in, can do web consults and stuff like that, where I can talk about this stuff online in a webinar because I'm in WA. And then, just doing lots of keynote speaking, trying to get people to know more about the red flags of abuse and online safety.
And for you, I understand also which is awesome work that you're doing in that space, and that's how you and I sort of connected. We sort of connected that way, and I understand you're also, you host a podcast called Operation Cape. And why did you start the podcast, and what's your aim and purpose of the podcast?
I wanted parents to have something that they could listen to, and obviously, and to connect with like-minded experts. Like in my world, and I don't know about you, Adam, it's not until you start doing this work outside of your career in the police or in the forces or whatever, that you realize how many people are actually out there trying to make a difference and trying to help people. And so when I look at, I'm connected with so many people in this space that I'll never have a lack of interviewees in regards to talking about child safety and how to so I started the podcast because I love talking and also because I love interviewing, and also because I want parents to have something in their back pocket that they can listen to. So I started in June. I've done 22 episodes or 21 episodes now. Next year I'm having a bit of a break for a couple of months, and then next year I'll get cracking again. But in the podcast I'm talking to experts in sex and healthy relationships. I'm talking to people about grooming. I'm talking about protective behaviors. I'm talking about online child exploitation. I'm talking about pretty tough subjects in some ways, victim survivors. I'm talking about all of these things in a way that can educate parents on what to watch out for, how to make a difference with their kids.
Well, congratulations on getting to 21 episodes, because you're actually part of 1% in the world of podcasters. So the average lifespan is 7, and to get so to get to 21, you're actually part of 1% in the world. So congratulations, and
you and me both.
Yeah, keep going. I'm up to 100 now, so I've recorded 100. So yeah, keep going, and at the times when you don't think it's making a difference, it is, and it's important to get these stories out and help people, and that's why I do this podcast as well. So congratulations on that, and I want to talk to you because it's important. The work you're doing in this space is so important, and better education. That's why I wanted to get you on and talk to you about your career, but also highlight what you're doing now. And what are your plans going into the future with your family?
Yeah, my family, my daughter's she's got 2 years to go and she's 18. I'm kind of helping her prepare for adulthood. I think, I don't know, we talked about it very briefly in the start. Our whole job and our whole purpose is we don't own our children. Our purpose is to shepherd them, protect them, guide them into adulthood and let them go. As scary as that is, I've been coming to that realization in the last year that, my job's nearly not done. There's no doing or being done as a parent. You're always a parent. But my job as her shepherd and guide is kind of nearly over, and I need to be ready for that. I'll always be there, but I can't hold on to her forever, and I don't own her. So I'm with my family. I'm starting to make plans for post parenthood, basically. Not really, but my daughter, my husband and I are looking at what that looks like for us. But in all of that, my business, what I'm doing, the education that I'm doing, the awareness that I'm doing on social media, I'm pretty avid on Instagram and TikTok and things like that. So all of that and what that might look like in the future, and also, what programs I can create for families. And some of the programs that I want to create in the next 12 months are, a body safety program for parents to be able to to learn how to teach their kids body safety from as young as possible. And, some of the more passion projects that I have is, how to identify predators when you're a single parent trying to date, like things like that I just want to keep pumping out information and sharing stuff with parents and adults and talking on stages and, bringing awareness to people.
That's awesome stuff. And for you, like you've mentioned, so everything you've been through, knowing what you know now and everything that you have been through, what advice would you give your 18-year-old self, and would she listen?
18-year-old self was pretty thought she knew everything. I bought a house at 18. Well, I would say I think about this quite often because I was in a rush to grow up, and I was in a rush to it came from a place of like fear, hence why I bought a house at 18, hence why I was married at 19, hence why I settled down so quickly and worked really hard. That came from a place of like fear. So what I would tell my 18-year-old self, and she probably wouldn't have listened, but is that there's time and to do more fun stuff, because one of the things that I haven't spent a lot of time is doing fun things, because I've been so serious about I've always been an innate protector of people and of the little people and of kids and others, and even before I became a police officer. So I think trying not to take life so seriously, travel a bit more. I don't know. Don't join the police at 18. That's what I would say. Do not join the police at 18. Have some life before you join. I'm not saying it's a bad career. I'm just saying make sure you know who you are as a person before you join.
That's great advice. And on that, where you've mentioned the police and all that you've been through and all that you've experienced, looking back now, was joining the police still the best decision that you made?
Yeah, it was, because I'm here now in doing what I'm meant to be doing. Like, I know that this is my purpose and mission. It became very clear when I was finishing my book up that this is what I'm meant to be doing, and I had to go through all that to get here. So yeah, definitely.
So what advice would you give any young person that is looking to go into the emergency services, or police, fire, ambulance, and like we mentioned, get a bit of life experience, but what other what other advice would you give them, because they're going into a dangerous world? Like it is and it's not what you see on TV. And what advice would you give to anyone who is thinking about a career in the emergency services?
I would say I would definitely think that what probably would have been easier or helped more is if I had have maintained good friendships outside of the job and had more hobbies outside of the job and stuff like that. And if I had have definitely create like a life outside of that world, because once you're in that world, it becomes your whole world. And so you need to have like that levity, like that you need to have something on the outside of it that makes you remember how good people are and how amazing life is, and that not everyone's a shithead and not everything's so black and white. And, having that outside really does make a difference. And when I had that down pat, my life was golden. But when life got harder and I let it go, that's when I struggled with my mental health. And I would say that, no job is worth your mental health. No job. Doesn't matter if you work in mining, doesn't matter if you work in the police, doesn't matter if you're a nurse or whoever you are. If it's leading you down a path of serious mental health stress and challenges, then seriously reconsider your options.
Absolutely, great advice. And you mentioned that people, so you're on social media, and how do people get in contact with you if they want to reach out to you and grab you for speaking events or podcasts, or how do they get in contact with you?
So I started my business is called Child Abuse Prevention and Education Australia, which is the CAPE, CAPE AU. So, but to find me on social media, just look up Kristi McVee with a K, so Kristi McVee. It sounds like Christine McVee from Fleetwood Mac, but it's not. And on TikTok, I'm the TikTok Cop 81. But if you want to contact me for anything, you can just go onto my website, which is at www.cape.au.com. So that stands for Child Abuse Prevention and Education Australia.
And you're also on LinkedIn as well, aren't you?
Oh, yeah, LinkedIn. I always forget LinkedIn. Yeah, so I'm Kristi McVee on LinkedIn, and I do have child abuse prevention and education on there, but I'm more when I first started my business, or when I first started talking about this stuff after 2 years of being in the police, 2 years out of the police, I was like, I don't want to be the face of it. I don't want people to know who I am. But unfortunately, that's how it happened. But now I'm a bit more comfortable with it. So yeah, Kristi McVee everywhere.
Absolutely. And I love your name. It's so cool. It's such a cool name. So, and well, just before we wrap up, I've got a couple of last questions for you. Favorite police or emergency services show that you watch?
I've got to make an admission. I hate most of them because they're so. I'm always like, where are their gloves? Or like if they're doing forensics, and I'm like, that doesn't fucking take that long. It takes forever. So I can't watch most of them because of that. I'm a big fan of Reacher, the current show on Prime. I'm a big fan of like make believe, blow them up. I think it's to just get out of reality. So I NCIS maybe, but only because it's not really in my realm of things, but I still get angry when they don't use gloves.
Spoken like a true police officer. And favorite music, favorite chill out music.
Ooh, so many. I grew up in a household with country music, musicals, classical. I didn't grow up with much else, but I also played the flute in a band, like when I was in like primary school, high school. But probably chill out music would be Hosier or someone like that. Someone chill.
Nice.
Very, very soulful music. But funny story, I'm writing another book for something at the moment, or writing some stuff at the moment, and I listen to EDM music because for some reason that just gets my brain going. So I'm just going with whatever goes.
I love it. That's mad. And what for you, this is the last one, and then I want to finish with a quote that I believe sums up your story. What do you have a guilty pleasure that no one knows about, that you absolutely have a guilty pleasure for?
Does it have to be guilty though? Like,
oh, well, it doesn't have to be guilty, but just something that someone doesn't know.
Oh, okay. All right. No one knows this, but this is like now everyone's going to know. I love to read fiction, but a certain genre of fiction. I'm not saying anymore, but it's I can spend hours. Like it started in the police when I was guarding prisoners or like sitting at hospitals and stuff, where I started reading like books, and I just devour them. I can read a whole book in a day, 300 pages in a day, which is actually a bad thing because it turned into a disassociation thing where I was disassociating from life because it was too hard. Probably one of the things that a lot of people don't realize is that I actually love swimming in the ocean, and it's only something I've picked up in the last couple of years. I live right near the ocean, and up until recently I had horses. So one of the sad things about my experience with PTSD and anxiety is that I had horses for 30 years. And whilst I was going through the grips of that, I couldn't go near them. It was like I don't know, the anxiety I felt was ruining my experiences with my horses. I had multiples. And so I've sold everything, and I've only got one old retiree left, and I have to go visit him before Christmas. But he's in retirement, and so that used to be my guilty pleasure. I like having horses, riding. Like it's such an expensive hobby, right? So I don't have anything like that, but I do go and sit in the ocean if I can, try not to get eaten by sharks, because we've got heaps in Western Australia. And I did it during winter and everything, and people used to look at me like I was mad because the water was so cold and it was fucking freezing. So I understand the ice bath thing.
Yep.
But yeah, there's something about how invigorated you feel after being in the sea.
I can absolutely agree with you on that because I just did my second ice bath yesterday and I absolutely love them.
You're on a high afterwards, like a full
It's
high.
18 hours and they say it's actually better than cocaine. So,
Who
and
needs drugs?
exactly when your body can naturally release a drug. So, and I totally get it. I love the water. I love the sound of the sea crashing and on like the waves hitting the shore, and it's just that's my place too. Like it's just really it's a cathartic thing to just go and chill and just sit in the water. And yeah, I totally get it. And yeah, so I'm a converted. I love ice baths, so I totally get why you do it, and they're amazing. And so I want to finish this quote. And Kristi, you've served your state with honour and brought pride to your family. And there's a quote that I believe sums you up. The quote is, "Pride is holding your head up when everyone around you has theirs bowed. Courage is what makes you do, is what you do and why you do it." So I believe that quote represents you. I want to thank you for your service as a police officer. Thank you for all you do for first responders, veterans, and people who are suffering mental health, and the work that you do to keep kids safe. You are a true advocate, and it has been an honor and a privilege to have you on True Blue Conversations and share your story. Kristi McVee, thank you so much for coming on True Blue Conversations.
Thanks, Adam. I really appreciate that.
Welcome, loyal listeners of True Blue Conversations. Today's episode is proudly sponsored by Australian Warfighter Coffee. Veteran owned and run, driven by a simple yet powerful motto: people over profit. Every dollar goes towards supporting veterans and first responder charity groups. Head on over to AustralianWarfighters.com and use the code TRUEBLUE for your exclusive discount. Because let's face it, any other coffee is just brown sadness water. Thank you for tuning in to this episode of True Blue Conversations with your host, Adam Bloom. See you on the front line.